or physics exam. The intent of a MCAT is to determine of you all who are attempting to study and take and sit for it, who is prepared to receive on their first day of medical school an education based on clinical reasoning. I'll repeat that again. The MCAT is an exam that's testing to see, out of all of y'all, who got what it takes, who has what it takes to start to learn about clinical reasoning the first day they get there, right? So let's talk about what clinical reasoning looks like, because that's going to hopefully help fill in the gaps for some of you, right? So I want you guys to pause and take a moment and reflect on the last doctor's appointment you went to. Take 2 seconds, right? And I'm guessing the doctor's appointment went something like this. You told the doctor a bunch of stuff. It hurts here. It's been hurting for this long. Sometimes when it hurts here, it also hurts over there, right? And when it hurts, sometimes it's a pinch. It's a 4 out of 5, right? You gave the doctor all this information, right? But what was the first thing the doctor did, right? Does anybody want to unmute themselves and just kind of say, like, what's the first thing the doctor does after you just tell them a bunch of stuff, right? What's going on in their head? Anybody unmute yourself? Just let's have a conversation. Let's make this collaborative.
I can go. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Tasman. Yeah, I can hear you, Tasman. So you gave a doctor a dump of all this information, right? Where it hurts, how long it hurts. What's the first thing that goes on through their head?
Well, I went to my dentist a couple of weeks ago because of a wisdom teeth infection. And after I told them all of my symptoms and what was going on, the first thing they did was, touch the area and check what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tasman, what do you think he did even before he touched the area? Right? Let me give you a clue of what he did first, right? He listened to everything you said, and he asked himself, of all the things that Tasman said, what's actually important? You told me that it started hurting when you were drinking orange juice. Is it the orange juice, right? Is this a persistent thing? Is this an acute thing, right? They had to go through a way of looking at all the words you gave them and saying, what's important first? Let me rearrange our conversation into the most salient or important facts, right? That's the first thing he did. The second thing he did before he even touched you, he said, let me go back and think of all the toothaches I've seen before in the past, right? All the toothaches I've learned about, the types of toothache, the content he knows, right? He looked at this content he had. He looked at the pattern recognition from all the practice passages he'd done on toothaches, right? And he came up with the best guess of what could probably make sense to do next. Touch it, right? Anybody who's done a practice passage, does that kind of seem familiar? Right? That way of reasoning and thinking. Tasman, thank you again for volunteering. But go ahead if you have a question. Again, Tasman, don't let me cut you off, but I'm really trying to get across to you guys, right, that the exam that you're taking is about clinical reasoning, right? If you get that in your head right now, it'll make so much more sense why you can't get above a 500. You can't get above a 510. You can't get above a 5, whatever number you're looking to get, right? It's an exam about clinical reasoning, right? And the steps that we take in clinical reasoning are, step 1, what's the important part of what I heard? Step 2, right? Based on the things that I know in my head about all the diseases that are associated with what I heard, right? How can I start to organize that information, that content that I have, in order to begin to create a prediction, right, of what might possibly be the thing that is affecting someone. So I'm going to pause here on this conversation. We're going to come back to this exact same conversation when we actually dig through some of those section bank passages. And hopefully it should make a little bit more sense. So we can go back to the slides and really to kind of start with the basics, right? So what are some of y'all doing that y'all should probably start changing if you want to see your scores go up? So the first thing is, are you studying too much content, right? So let's talk about numbers behind this idea that I told you. I said, oh, Kamanthi told me that this is a critical reasoning exam, right? I can believe him or he can prove it to me. Here's how we prove it. A passage is what every real question on the exam is based out of, and every passage typically has 6 questions. Of those 6 questions, I'm going to just annotate just to help people follow along. So one passage has 6 questions in it. Of those 6 questions, you have 3 types. You have 2 discrete questions, right? So for those of you guys who've taken an exam already know that it looks like a regular answer choice, regular question, but it's tucked in within an exam, right? Next, you have an explicit question, right? What does an explicit question mean? It simply states, based on the passage, according to the author, based on paragraph, based on figure, what is explicitly stated in the passage, right? You're going to get 2 more of those. Just another 33% of that passage. And the last kind, you're going to get 2 implicit questions, right? So that's when they say, look, we didn't talk about the kind of condition that a mice grew up in, but we want to see if I can tell you that there's a germ-free environment, right? Do you have the critical reasoning skills to realize that what is implied is that I'm saying that you have no gut bacteria? And based on the passage you just read, you have no signaling pathway associated with whatever the gut bacteria normally did. So signal gone, right? Then we're trying to get you to do and figure out what is implied by a piece of information that was not in the passage. So this is outside the text, right? So what's the point of Kamanthi going on this tangent without even really telling you what was posted on the exam or on the little post that I posted wherever you found it, right? The reason is I want you guys to just do a simple, quick math problem and ask yourself a quick rhetorical question, right? 66% of this exam is not content. 2 out of the 4 questions, right? 2 out of the 4 questions, an explicit and implicit question, are critical reasoning questions. 66% of the exam is critical reasoning. Have you, or are you currently, or do you plan on spending 66% of your time that you study on building your critical reasoning skills, however that looks like? Or are you spending that 66% of your time on content review? All right? So the point of the first thing that if you're doing this already that you should probably not do, spend and allocate your time more in line with the exam that you're going to take. The exam is a critical reasoning exam. 66% of every passage is a critical reasoning question. So let's actually allocate our time less to content and more to passages, because that's where you actually learn, right? But some of you guys might turn around and say, hey, Kamanthi, I'm doing passages, right? My score is not going up, right? Question I'm gonna ask you is, are you reviewing those passages? Or are you just doing them for the sake of doing them? And if you are reviewing the passages, are you just doing a superficial review of the passages? Right? So I had a student tell me this, and I think it's a great analogy. He said, look, you have to decide, are you going to just be in the process of writing down your mistakes and then moving on to make more mistakes? Or are you writing down your mistakes so that you can learn from them? Right? And if you're looking to do the latter, right, my advice for you, right, so a major key. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to just give you guys major keys. And I'm going to just say that as a way for you guys that are taking notes to think of that is something that you should probably write down and reflect on after, right? So a major key for those of you guys that are actually doing the right amount of content, but actually specializing most of your time on doing passages and reviewing them, the major key is the most effective point where you should engage with content review on a primary level, right? Khan Academy video, Kaplan book, whatever, is that moment after you've done a passage, you've reviewed your mistakes, you've analyzed your critical thinking mistakes, your content mistake, whatever it is, you've identified a gap in your knowledge or a mistake you're persistently making. That is the perfect time for you to stop and review the content. Not what some of you guys do right now, where you spend time and you block off an hour to an hour and a half to review content, right? Exam mistakes that you made, right? you document them, and then you schedule out time in the future down the line to go learn them. That's not an effective or efficient use of your time. It's more efficient to close the loop immediately. I'm going to use the term loop a lot, right? Because my approach to studying really fundamentally was a loop. I would review my content. I would do practice passages. I would do a review of those passages. I would document what I learned. And then I used that to guide what I needed to study next. But the one big difference that I didn't do that you should do is make sure you review your content immediately as you go through that review cycle. So what can you make sure you're not doing? Don't do too much content. Make sure you review. Don't review superficially, right? And most importantly, you want to start to find your own learning insights, right? Because if you learn something, you have a aha moment, but you never wrote it down, it never happened. So documenting your insights, whatever way that looks like, that could be an Excel spreadsheet is what I advise. It could be a Word document, whatever it is, right? I always advise you do a documenting step because that's going to give you learning insights that tell you, oh, I don't really need to go learn physics. I don't even need to go learn electrochemistry or electricity and magnetism, electrostatics. What I really need to do is need to go back down and look at my sign conventions for electricity and magnetism because I seem to be getting questions wrong because of signs, right? Now you've gone from, oh, I have a content level issue to you've gained a learning insight by doing passages, doing an in-depth review of those passages, documenting what it is that you learned, right? Coming back and spending time looking at that, right? And gaining a learning insight that helps you be more precise and effective with your time. All right? So I'm going to just kind of walk you through in a little bit more detail my own specific MCAT studying approach, but I always like to start off with what I consider that to be setting the stage for really what we hope to accomplish today. So I'm going to just go ahead and continue and just talk through how I approached my studying. And a lot of this stuff should sound almost repetitive as if I've already said it. But the goal is it should be hopefully trying to drive the same point across because it's an important point. So first and foremost, I took a content-specific, passage-focused approach. What does that mean, right? If I was spending an hour and a half on physics, right? I didn't do physics passage content first. I tried to first focus on the passages. So some of you guys might be saying, okay, I'm doing that already. So you might be doing passages, let's say on UWorld, right? But all of those passages are just physics passages, right? So the issue I found was you got a bunch of random physics passages, but you really didn't have a way of prioritizing your weaknesses, right? Because for me, I thought it would be smarter if I took a content-specific approach, say electrostatics is the topic that I needed to work on. Why? Because I identified that as a weakness. However I worked on it, I intended to prioritize my learning of that. And if I was going to do passages, I wanted to do an hour and a half of electrostatic passages, right? So that's what I mean when I say a content-specific approach, because what this allowed me to do is I got really good at pattern recognition. Anyone who wants to get above a 510, you can't get up there just by content. 510, maybe 507, maybe you get there with content only. 510, your critical reasoning and your pattern recognition have to be on point because you have to be fast. How do you get fast? I saw so many electrostatic passages that I started to recognize the patterns for how electrostatics was commonly tested on the AMC. So now as a tutor, it makes it easier for me to teach electrostatics, the content, right? And electrostatic, the critical reasoning, because I've figured out the patterns and the content that is relevant to the way MCAT tests it, right? So I always like to add this on as a way for you to visualize the way people are studying. If you're just doing a physics block, this is what you're doing. If you're taking a content-specific approach, this is what you're doing. Right? So over here, this is what I'd consider a content specific approach. Sorry, my spelling was really bad today. This is a content specific approach. Why? Because you're going to just do a bunch of electrostatic passages. I like to go from easy, medium, and hard, and I'll talk to you about how I kind of break down the different resources to determine what's easy, medium, or hard. But the key takeaway is if you're trying to make yourself better at MCAT, you want to, 1, prioritize. 2, prioritize on your weaknesses. 3, spend at least 66.7% of your time on critical reasoning, right? And that can take a bunch of different ways. The best way this typically takes is either doing passages or reviewing passages. All right? So with that being said, I'm just going to finish up and just talk through the last couple things. So when I took a content-specific, passage-focused approach to the science section, I always made sure like I thoroughly documented every practice question that I did, and I would review my MCAT passage review document like weekly. And my goal is I was trying to analyze any trends in the mistakes that I was making. So was I missing questions that I should have known based on knowing them previously, or was I consistently getting electrochemistry questions wrong? And that was an area that was a weakness that I needed to prioritize in order to get to my score. And then lastly, I focused my dedicated content review time only on the topics that I was weak in, right? So my content review, right, was prioritized to my weakness, but all my other, for example, top content review to maintain how good I was on my content, I did it in a passage-focused way. To confirm that I knew my content, I did it in a passage-focused way, right? So I always framed my studying around passages, reviewing, documenting, driving insights for my learning. So with that, this is my actual study schedule that I pulled for how I studied a specific topic, right? And keep in mind, this isn't over one day, right? This is over, maybe a 7-day period, or it could be a 2-week period. Heck, it could be a month-long period if your exam's not even until January. But I want to talk you through the steps that are the most transferable and the things that I think make the most sense, right? So first, I took a content-specific approach. So that was the content-specific part of it. That was the content-specific portion of my studying, right? I then began by doing the most basic thing I could do, is acquire content, right? So I started off here with my content review, right? This is my first pass of my content review. Once I'd done a first pass of content review and kind of got my feet wet, right? I wanted to just go in there, and I started trying passages out, right? Because I wanted to confirm how much of the content that I knew. And then I wanted to get my feet wet in the critical thinking skills that I needed to build up in order to do the type of questions, the type of electrostatic questions the MCAT would give me. And my ultimate goal, remember, was what? I wanted to get to a point where I became a master at electrostatics questions on the MCAT, both the content, but also the critical reasoning I needed to do electrostatic questions, and then also any patterns I could recognize from that sitting there with just one specific type of content. All right, so that's how I did it. A little thing about resources that I know people always kind of talk about or ask or have questions generally. So I arranged my practice passages from my practice resources from simple to from on a simplicity scale, right? So I said, look, the AMC QPAC, right, would be kind of like my easy passages. These are where I used easy passages just to check if I knew the content. So I might use a QPAC, or I love the Princeton Review Science Workbook, the 2016 edition. Not an ad. I actually liked it. I also like the Next Step Discrete 2,000 plus questions, right? Because they're easy, right? So they help me just get at, do I know the content? The Next Step one, for those that are curious, is more discrete. So it doesn't get at the critical reasoning. The practice passages from Princeton Review's workbook, I like a little bit better because they use passage format. So again, I started off at easy, and then I worked my way up to more challenging practice passages. So I considered UWorld to be my medium scale passages because I was like, look, those are going to be quality passages. It's a great paid resource. The explanations are really good, and I can drill in and do a couple interesting things with them. So another major key I'll give you is what I call clear the debt. So what I mean by that, by clear the debt, is when you do UWorld passages, right, go look at your incorrect tab. So as you're making and creating a new session in UWorld, you have an option that tells you to pick from all new, correct, like incorrect questions before you make a new session, right? Look at the number that's to the right of incorrect and see if that number is above 150, right? And by clear the debt, what I mean is make sure that you, as you're doing more UWorld passages, right? Make sure you try to do them from the incorrect bucket. Why? Because that's where your mistakes are. Your mistakes lead to your weaknesses. Your weaknesses tell you what you can do to prioritize. Same theme as of what I've talked about over the last couple slides. We're trying to get to your priority. We're trying to set your priorities by identifying the weaknesses that you have through documenting the mistakes that you make, right? So major key, clear the debt at UWorld if you're already using UWorld, but make sure you again take a content-specific approach by using those little block buttons, those buttons that they give you to do specific questions from specific topics, right? So that is the end of my discussion on approaches to studying. I try to spend no more than 30 minutes of your time. And I just want to drop in and just kind of show you the tracker tool that I built and the tracker tool that I am building and turning into more of a data-driven approach to MCAT studying. And it really captures the things that I really, really wanted to know. And I'm using this because it reviews kind of a really simple concept that I call a redo and review, right? And all it is, it's you take, for example, AMC full length 4, and you're going to do 2 attempts at it, separated by 1 variable, time. And we're going to look to document, or you should look to document, questions that you got wrong 2 times, right? Either questions you got wrong twice and pick the same answer choice, because that might be a content level thing that you need to work on, or questions that you picked wrong twice and picked separate answers, because that's more of a reasoning, right? So this is the tool that I used, honestly, to keep myself organized. And this is just a simple exercise that I should encourage all of you guys to do if you have exams that you're studying. Do a review and redo of 2 attempts and start to document. I created a system that I use to track a content category code into a specific topic, but kind of find your own way of making the main topic and then knowing whether or not you did well on it or didn't do well on it. Okay, so I like to put this slide here to just kind of get at the main themes of what I really want you to get and understand, right? We need to prioritize. And we prioritize by looking at our weaknesses. And we find our weaknesses by making a list of our mistakes. That cannot spell. And we are much more effective at doing this if we take a content-specific approach to the work that we're doing, right? And that way we can be able to say, for example, I need to go work on optics, right? Let me switch to something color. So you can identify a mistake that you made getting a question wrong 2 times on 2 separate exams. And the topic was optics, right? The reason you got it wrong is, you know, it looks like a critical reasoning thing, right? It's a flattening of a cornea. What's the effect of the cornea flattening on whatever optics equations you have, right? What's really changing here? Focal length is really what's changing here. It's a critical thinking skill. That was the issue here, right? So this helped me organize what I should prioritize my time next. Do I need to go study my optics equations, or do I need to spend time and think about the sort of critical reasoning skills that I needed to have in order to answer that question? Or even better, do I need to look at my optics content, look at the passage, and try to understand what components of the optics knowledge that's in my Kaplan book right, was the MCAT trying to capture my understanding of in this passage? Because that's going to help you start to figure out what are the high yield points that are testable, right? Simply understanding the effects of changing the focal length on a lens optic system is an important thing for you to know. Right? Many of you guys can do the equation, but can you critically reason through that when the lens is the cornea of your eye, right? And it flattening or becoming more concave is a condition, short-sighted or far-sighted, right? So again, you're trying to find your mistakes. You're trying to document your mistakes, find what areas you're weak in, and then prioritize what you spend time on. So with that being said, I'm going to just pause here real quick. I like to pause because I know people probably have answers. Just start to use the raise your hand feature, which will allow me to kind of come to you and unmute you so you can speak. I'm going to allow us to have 5 minutes to just kind of hear from you guys. But while we are taking this 5 minutes to just kind of hang out and answer questions, I want you guys to start to review this slide that I just put up on my checklist of how to do Biobiochem passages, because that is what we're going to start to use. Again, checklist, and I'll talk about why it's a checklist when we talk. So as I answer people's questions, review the checklist, right? And remember, it's Biobiochem in the AAMC section bank, right? And I plan on doing either question passage number 2, 4, or 5. I haven't decided yet which one I want to do. So if you guys in the meantime want to just look through that and look through the page, and I'm going to put myself on mute. So use the raise hand feature if you just have questions about the stuff that we talked about initially. How long should you review your full-length exams if you're somewhat confident with the content? So for the person who asked that question, I'll tell you that what I tell students that I tutor and I tell myself, I don't trust you and I don't trust myself when you say you're confident in the content, right? So you should spend about a time to time and a half reviewing the full length and critically thinking through, not, yeah, I think I know it, right? Yeah, I think I know it gets you to get like a really like average below your expectation exam score, right? How you know and how you get confidence is what's the outcome that you're going to use to measure, oh, I know that information. What I use when I tutor people is, okay, you did the full length exam, right? Did you go through it and document every question first, right? Did you then document every answer choice that you got wrong and kind of why you got those questions wrong? Have you done a longitudinal look and said, okay, the kind of questions I'm getting right, either on content or on skill, right? Have I changed? Do I have any patterns of the kind of questions I'm consistently getting wrong, right? So you really, really should, for a simple number, time to time and a half to review a full-length exam. So a day at minimum, right? How do you then feel actually confident to the point where you can trust yourself, right? Go through and thoroughly look at every question, look at every answer choice in every question, and it doesn't matter if you got the question right. Did you reason through it correctly? Because Tammy, the exam is 66% critical reasoning. You're only confident about your ability to do 33% of it if you're confident about the content. And so not only do you have to confirm in a very like data-driven way, whatever that looks like to you, right? So when I say data-driven, prove it to yourself, right? But the second part is, even as you review that exam and review the part that you're confident in, can you walk through your critical thinking skill, using your critical thinking skills to get to the answer choice? Because I'm going to tell you all something that sounds counterintuitive. AMC explanations are actually pretty fire. They're like really, really, really good, right? So I'm going to just go ahead and pause here and wait for someone to just like in the group chat say, wait, did you just say AMC explanations to full length exams are actually like really good at learning from, right? I'm going to wait until somebody like actually calls me out on what I just said, because there's a point I'm trying to make here that answers Tammy's questions, right? Right, the first. right? So whoever just responded to that, the reason why I think they're good is 66% of the exam is not content, right? So the AMC sometimes is going to give you an explanation that you look at and you're like, wait, that doesn't give me enough to answer the question. The thing is, AMC explanation is giving you the minimal amount of information you need to critically reason through the answer choice, because 66% of the exam is testing whether or not you're prepared to be able to receive a clinical reasoning education. So when you get lazy and you Google the answer choice and an explanation and you get it on Reddit and it's like, oh, totally made sense, right? You're just getting the content level explanation. You've gotten better at 33% of the exam, right? But you haven't really figured out that that question on that exam could have been answered by a person that's never, ever sat in a science question or science exam or science class. I used to actually run this little fun like party trick where I would have my, bring my fiance on to sessions like these on Sundays when we started them about 5 weeks ago, and have her do AMC practice passage from the section bank, because she's a lawyer. She's got critical reasoning skills. She's a lawyer. She has zero content skills, right? And my goal was, can I get her to do like 3, if we get lucky, 2 to 4 of the questions? Could she get them right? Why? It's about critical reasoning. It's not about content, right? So I'm using this as a very long way of explaining a simple thing, right? When you're quote unquote confident with your content, that just only tells you that you need to now go and figure out, am I confident with my critical reasoning skills? Yeah, so Janet, you said you messaged, they want us to reason through their, kind of reason through the answer. Yeah, and the passage that we do today, you'll see how we are going to go ahead and do the whole passage without even really using any science. We're going to reason through it critically. All right, so what third-party practice exams do you recommend? So real quickly, the exams that I like Altius, I like AMC preferably, I like Next Step. All right, so any more questions? Or I'm gonna start going over the stuff, all right? So, hey, how can I build mental stamina, my critical reasoning skills? Okay, great, so great question. How do I build mental stamina and how do I build my critical reasoning skills? So anybody familiar with like Charles Barkley, and his golf game, right? If so, just somebody post something. So yes, somebody say something in the chat that makes me know that everyone gets where I'm going. So Charles Barkley, he's a basketball player. He's got a terrible golf swing, right? So how would you advise Charles Barkley to fix his golf swing? I'm gonna guess you'd say practice. And yes, there's gonna be a recording of today's session. I decided to record the session today because we had a little bit large of a crowd and more people asking for recordings. So we are recording today. And if you email me, if you grab my email and stick to the very end, grab my email, send it out to me, or my email may have been in the post. You email me, I'll send you out the recording. So the point I'm making to answer the question about building stamina and building the skill is a golfer fixes their swing by swinging, right? But being smart about swinging. Okay, I'm gonna switch my hip position. All right, cool. Let me see where the ball goes. Oh, I went too far to the left. Maybe I need to switch it back to how it was before. You're making small minor changes, documenting the outcome. I'm gonna keep saying this word outcome. It's gonna help you on the passage. It's also gonna help you prepare for MCAT, right? So the way you build stamina is you wanna do what? You wanna practice your passages. You wanna thoroughly review them. You wanna really, really document, right? But you wanna start to reflect on, okay, I took a practice full-length exam today. How did I feel at the end of cars? Was I tired, right? If I was, what can I do to make it better the next time? Maybe I should bring some dry fruit or some granola between my my chem phys and car section so I have a little gas in the tank, right? Oh, I submitted my exam, my psych-soc exam with 25 minutes left. I'm a fast psych-soc taker. No, you're not. You're a quitter. You got too tired. You didn't have enough mental stamina. Why? You haven't really practiced enough long sessions of 1.5 hour long practice exams or practice question sessions. And I say you're a quitter because you submitted early with 20 minutes left because you ran out of gas and you wanted to get out of there, right? You quit because you'll have 20 minutes, 25 minutes of the most precious time that you have on that MCAT, because those are the last moments you had the exam and your score in your hand, and you hadn't prepared in a meticulous way that thought about your test day performance, and you weren't able to perform until the last minute to give yourself the best chance to score as high as you could on that section, right? Ultimately, I'm answering a lot of these questions around a very simple idea. Take a critical approach, right? Almost like a mini scientist on how you need to study for the exam, right? If you're testing in January, should we practice COVID testing? So if you're studying, right, I want you to think of your studying in two phases. Preparing for the exam, preparing to perform and execute for the exam, right? So worrying about whether or not it's COVID, if I've got to take a mask or all that, right? That's performance. That comes later on the second half, right? Before you can worry about how you perform, you got to make sure that you've even studied for the right exam, right? Studying for the right exam means, have you done the practice passages? Have you reviewed them? Have you documented them? Have you gone back and followed up on your content and really polished up, right? That's what you should be thinking if you have an exam that's in January, right? As you get closer, I'd advise 2 to 4 weeks out when you have 2 to 4 full-length exams left, right? That's when you want to start to really, really critically think about performance, right? That's when you start to reflect on how much energy do I have in a section, or practice, if I'm going to do cars, a month out from test day, I tell all my students that I work with, do hour-long blocks at minimum of cars, because we're trying to get used to reading for an hour-long, 60 to 90 minutes, and still staying focused. So I think that answers that question that somebody has. And then, do you recommend practice exams with standard time or COVID time sets? Some people say standard time better because it lets you endure the exam. So Cedra, it depends where you are, right? The whole idea of COVID time, right, if you think about the last answer I gave, is a test execution, test performance issue. If you're still at a 500, or you're still at, 5, 6, 7 points away from your target score, or if you're 4+ weeks away from your exam date, right, you really just should be doing things in standard time. COVID shouldn't even be something you think of. COVID becomes a thing that you think of for all of you guys that have that as a test thing that you're thinking of, and I understand. COVID, test day are things that you really bring to the front of your mind 4 to 5 weeks out. And the way you actually go about it is you take a scientific approach. What do scientists do? They think of an independent variable they need to fix, test performance, right? They consider different variables. Do I test with the mask on? Do I not? They record all the outcomes they get, and then they critically think about what those outcomes mean. What can they conclude, and what they can go ahead and do next, right? So as all of you guys think about all your different, oh wow, I did say your name right, Cedra. So as you think of all the different questions you have, right? Ultimately, you're gonna end up having more questions than a friend, advisor, a tutor, anyone can answer. And if you're really serious about this whole med school thing, you're getting yourself into kind of trying to become a professional learner, right? And the professional part means you got to do some of it on your own. So the thing I can give you now is just give you the knowledge of what the exam actually is, and begin to give you a couple tools to simplify it. So with that, let's do some biochem, y'all. What do y'all think? Can I get some yeses if we're good to do some biochem? I got a yes. All right, got enough yeses to say let's do it. So what I'll advise for you guys, right? The best setup for you on your computer is I would have Zoom, right, on one end. And I would open up your section bank if you have it. If you don't, it's fine, follow along. But if you do, open up your section bank, and we're gonna start off, just for you, look at passage 2 of the Biobiochem section, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna explain and teach, right? So we're gonna go into more of like a teaching session now. I'm gonna teach my checklist, my 7 points that I use, but as I'm teaching you what they are, right? If you are looking at AMC, section bank, Biobiochem, passage number 2, right? If you are actually looking at that and listening to what I'm saying, right? I'm going to be talking over this slide, but very easily weaving in things that are in that passage. So I recommend if you have that open in one tab, look there, listen in, right? And if you need to, bump over to the Zoom. If you don't have the AMC materials, it's fine. I got the practice passage that I'm talking about in this deck. So if you have access to the deck, you can pull it open. It's slide 8 through 11, I believe. If not, I'm gonna get to it. So with that, I'm gonna give everybody 30 seconds to get situated using that setup I said. So open the section bank, go to passage 2. It should start talking about something to do with gut bacteria and how they are implicated in metabolism. And so for you guys that are like, wait, what is the passage? This is what the passage looks like. So as soon as I get a okay in the chat, I'm gonna start teaching the approach. So let me get an okay when people feel, all right, got 1 okay, 2 okays, 3, and we're ready to go. All right, cool, perfect. So we're gonna start talking about how to approach Biobiochem, but we're gonna start in a weird place. Psych Soc, and we're gonna talk about a simple concept called working memory. All right, anybody wanna just like be confident and just use the raise hand feature and kind of just like join me in like a 1 minute long conversation about what you know about working memory and why the hell am I talking about working memory in a biochem experimental passage section that we're supposed to be talking about. So somebody give me a raise the hand and I'll unmute you and we can just chat to help explain the point. Or you can unmute yourself and just start talking. All right, Andrew, you want to just, I think I unmuted you. Andrew, you want to jump in here and kind of chat with me? Andrew
Sure,
P?
I can give it a try, yep.
All right, so what do you know about working memory?
Well, there are 3 different breakdowns in memory. I believe working memory is the memory that we talk about. We can hold 7 plus or minus 2 in our
interesting
current
number.
mind
Let's
state.
pause there. You said how many number?
7 plus or minus 2. It's usually
7 plus or minus 2. All right. How many points do you guys see here?
There we go, 7.
7. Right. So already we're starting to make a connection. 7 plus or minus 2. Right. So why is it that what happens if you try to put more than 7 things in your working memory? What can you not do?
You can't really retain it effectively. So essentially what they say is you have that range because they give the example of having a phone number. We remember the last 6 digits of a phone number more easily than all 9. So if you are to remember a number, a lot of times, even if you memorize the first 3, we remember the last 6. So you
Bingo.
In that range, we're able to actually effectively use our memory or actively think in the spot and be able to have that more primed in our brains.
Cool, perfect. So you hit it spot on, right? So here we go. Let me bring you home and explain. Well, we're actually going to use an anecdote. Maybe this is an anecdote of something that you've experienced, right? Have you ever gotten MCAT fog brain? And if you don't know what MCAT fog brain, it's fine because I just made up the term right now. But if you can intuitively think about what MCAT fog brain is, have you ever had it? Hello?
Are you directly talking to me? I'm sorry. I want to make sure.
It's you and I. So the way it's going to work is this is interactive. So when I call you out, think of it almost as like there's no one here in the room, and we're basically having a private session about the topic. And what we're doing is we're actually paying it forward by your interaction and learning with me is going to actually help everybody else that's on the call learn, right? So fog brain on the MCAT. Have you ever looked at a passage, gone through it, read it, maybe done a question, and the whole entire time, like your brain legitimately feels like cloudy, right? Yeah. Like if for those of you guys that live in states where recreational marijuana is available or have had a foggy day, you legit feel like cloudy and foggy and don't know what is going on, right?
Yeah.
Ever had that?
Yes, I have.
All right. And do you think anybody else in this chat has ever had that too?
I believe they have in different sections, yes.
Right. What do you think that they were filling up too much?
I feel when that happens, you probably try and understand or focus on too many parts of the passage. So you, as the first step says, find the main topic. If you don't align it with the main topic, you may think everything's important. And as a result, you may go all over the place.
Perfect. So what we basically were trying to get at is really at the core of how you described working memory was perfect, right? You need to be able to only hold about 7 plus or minus 2 things that are new in your brain in order to allow you to have enough compute power, if you want to use a technology term, to go back and reach back and think about that glycolysis step, right? Or that physics equation, right? In order to do even that critical thinking skills that you've been building on your own, right? And so if you're going to attack any passage, especially the experimental passages, right? You want to first ask yourself, what are the 7 most salient points that I need to pick up from the passage, right? So Andrew, thank you so much for helping out. I really hope that this has kind of helped start to explain the approach a little bit, right? So I'm gonna go through the 7 steps here. And what I want you guys to remember again is the last word of the first title. And I'm gonna highlight it again so it's very clear. This is not a strategy. It's not a set of steps. It's not a tip. All I'm doing is giving you guys a checklist of the 7 things that I think are the most important for you to pick up about an experimental passage in order to answer as best as you can the 66% of the exam that is about critical reasoning. And I contend that if you do it right and if you studied well enough, it actually makes you answer the other 2 questions or even predict what they're going to be. But that's a little bit more of an advanced thing that we might not talk about today. So for today, I'm going to first go through all 7 of these steps. As I go through them, my goal is to explain the why behind it, right? I like to explain the why because remember, your intention is to become an independent learner as a medical student. That means you need to know the why so you can understand it for yourself and determine how you can integrate it into your studying, okay? So again, if you guys have AMC material, pull up that passage. Even though I'm going to be talking about my steps to my approach, in my talking, I'm going to, in real time, be using examples and providing you with major keys of phrases, words, little tidbits that can make going through biochem passages easier for you, okay? So let's start. First thing, everyone knows this, find the main topic, right? So what I'm going to talk to you all about is what does the main topic look like in biochemistry? So it's going to look like 2 things, right? It could be a straight up concept. Oh, Krebs, easy. I see the picture, I see the steps, right? But more commonly in biochem, especially in difficult passages, right? The main topic might actually end up being a process, right? Not a concept, but a process, right? So a process, for example, might be the following, right? We have these bugs that live in your stomach, right? We don't really know what they do, but we think they're involved somehow in metabolism, right? Like, doesn't take a genius to figure out gut, bugs, metabolism, right? But when we explore the process or the steps, we realize that these bugs, they can break down fiber that comes in our stomach. Why fiber? Because biochemistry, carbohydrates concept, humans lack a beta-1,4 glycosidase enzyme. Okay, it makes sense why these bugs are living there in our stomach and they're breaking down these fibers. But the next thing that happens after they break down this fiber is they create these short-chain fatty acids, concept we probably know from some metabolism work we've done, right? All right, cool. We don't really know what the main topic of this passage is so far that I'm saying, right? But so far, what do we know? Some gut, they break down some fiber, and that fiber becomes some type of short-chain fatty acid, right? So what do we know about short-chain fatty acids? All right, fats, they're usually involved in like storing energy, all right? But then the passage might tell us a little bit more about the process, right? Remember, we're piecing together the main topic. That could be a concept or a process. And so far, the process that we have is gut bacteria consume some type of fiber, generate short-chain fatty acids, which are able to do 2 things. They can provide energy for the host, but they're a signaling molecule. That's something we didn't know, right? So why am I making an emphasis on, oh, that is something that we didn't know, and that is something that we already knew, right? When I mentioned short-chain fatty acid, among the things that should have popped and been visualized in your brain is fat, maybe abdominal fat even, right? Adipocytes, right? Fatty acid metabolism, fatty acid oxidation, storage of energy, but signaling probably really wasn't on your brain, right? Unless you really, really did a good job of learning your cell signaling and you know that the phospholipase C pathway is really a fatty acid that's being sent, right? But maybe you didn't know that, right? But the thing is, this is a new piece of information that I just dropped in your heads, right? And it's new because it's important. It's important because it is the first clue I've given you so far in my little rambling talk about these gut bacteria of what might be the specific part of this passage or this process that I've been telling you that the MCAT plans on digging into over the next 2 or 3 paragraphs, and a couple charts they give you. Okay? So let me take a quick inventory of all that I've talked about so far. I've only talked about one thing really. The idea of how do we decipher what the main topic is, right? And we first start off by saying there could be 2 types of main topics. We can have a concept, so it could be straight up Krebs, or it could be literally a passage where they tell you how a sarcomere works. Right? You guys have seen these passages. They're usually what you would term an easy passage, right? Because the answers are right there. The process is right there. If you forgot the steps or what the Z line is or what's titin or what is this, what is that in a sarcomere, it's right there. Where some of you guys struggle is when they give you processes and they tell you step 1, the gut bacteria exist. Step 2, we think they're involved in metabolism. Step 3, they break down fiber. Step 4, that fiber breaks down into short chain acids. Step 5A, those short chain fatty acids can be used to store energy. Step 5B, new fact, those short chain acids can be used to signal. And specifically, they can signal through a G-coupled protein receptor, right? And that G-coupled protein receptor is only found on one type of cell. It's only found on adipocytes, right? So does anybody kind of want to hop on to the call real quick and see if they can re-articulate to me what they think the main topic is for this passage that I'm describing? Feel free, it's easier for me to just have somebody just hop on, unmute yourself, answer the question, chat with me, and then mute yourself back than it is for me to find someone in the chat.
Okay, I can try. So
let's try to do this. Sorry to cut you off. Let's start, if you're gonna jump on, because we're gonna have probably a couple more people jump on and do this kind of exercise. Let's do something simple. Name, where are you at, and give us an MCAT fact about you, right? So your exam date, you don't have an exam date. If you don't want to give us an MCAT fact, just give us a fact. Make it funny if you're not going to give us an MCAT fact, because we want to laugh if we're going to be listening to you. So keep us interested. So go ahead. That being said, I'll let you go and try.
What do you mean by MCAT fact?
So, hey, my MCAT fact is my exam is on Friday. That would be an MCAT fact. Or, hey, I'm retaking it again if you want to share that, right? Or if you don't want to share something about MCAT, tell us something that's interesting about you. Like, I have a dog.
Okay.
Right?
Hi,
just make it more interactive.
Okay. I'm Jaleesa. I plan to take the MCAT again on September 11th. And an MCAT fact is the last time I took the MCAT, I got excited on how easy the discrete questions were, and I made a silly mistake.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing. So you want to help us walk through what you think the main idea of this passage that I'm talking to you guys about? And by the way, I hope you guys know, as I'm talking to you, I'm actually walking around my apartment and not looking at the passage and really trying to teach you the 7 points. And the way I'm remembering what I need to talk to you about is I know the 7 things I got to say, right? So that's a nice little clue to kind of to give you how I'm processing and teaching and how you need to ultimately think about looking at this checklist. So with that being said, you want to walk us through what you think step 1 is. What do you think the main topic is here, or the process that they're trying to outline?
Yeah, I thought that the main topic was talking about the breakdown, because I highlighted catabolism, so the breakdown of fatty acids.
Okay, what about them specifically?
So as you mentioned, it being signaled and these fatty acids expressing only in white adipose tissue. So I visualize fat tissue in my stomach, like you said, because that's where a lot of people have their fat, and because it said specifically it's not expressed in muscles or liver, so you go away from it being expressed in like your arms or your leg, but maybe it may be expressed in like your thigh where a lot of fat is.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm writing down exactly kind of what you said, right? So we first start off with gut bacteria. They did something to fiber. They created some short chain fatty acid. And then they did what they activated some type of G-coupled protein receptor, right?
Correct.
And you said that was only on white adipocytes, white adipose tissue, right?
Right.
So I want to just use this, Jaleesa, as a quick lesson to anyone that's on the call that's looking at the actual question, right? So what you'll see is the way that the MCAT writes in paragraph 3, sentence 1, I believe, they mention something to the effect of that the G-coupled protein receptor, GCPR43, I believe, is found on white adipocytes and not on liver or muscle cells, right?
Right.
And the learning point here is anytime that MCAT tells you where something is not gonna be, just pause. They're telling you something, right? That's a major key, if you will, right? MCAT doesn't just say things to say things, they say things for a purpose. So if you hear that something is not somewhere, what they're really trying to tell you is you need to know why is it in the other place, right? So if it's only in a white adipocyte, right? What are some things that we think could happen, right? So Jaleesa, you and I, let's just play around real quick, right? So let's say this thing is all working and the G-coupled protein receptor is turned on. What do you expect that white adipocyte to do? Broadly.
I think about sugar. Breaking
sugar, okay. Breaking it down, right?
Down, yeah. It being, I know if it says not liver, then we don't think about like glycolysis and all those types of things, but that's pretty much, because later on it talks about energy regulation, so it has to be something in reference to
energy.
Glucose.
Yeah, glucose, energy, metabolism, somewhere there like that, right?
Right.
All right, perfect, awesome. So thank you very much for helping us figure out what the main topic is. So you can go ahead and put yourself on mute. So now I've gotten on the right side, if everyone can see what I think the main topic is of this passage, right? And what you'll recognize is it's not a sentence. It's not like a cute little like, oh, it's about this, is about that. It's a set of steps, right? It's a set of steps from a bug to what that bug does. It digests fibers. What does that digestion create? Short chain fatty acids. What do those short chain fatty acids do? They signal through what? A G-coupled protein receptor. And then what does that G-coupled protein receptor end up causing? An intracellular signal that causes fat cells to do some kind of metabolic activity. Still haven't figured out what that metabolic activity is. We're working on it, okay? So we found out what the main topic is. The next thing we got to figure out is what the specific part of the main topic being that set of steps that they're trying to look in and test, okay? So I'm going to give y'all another major key if y'all are writing stuff down, right? When you're looking to find the specific part of it, what you're looking for in the passage is where they tell you, what are they looking to analyze, to determine, right? What are they hypothesizing, right? What are they looking to assay? Assay is a nice fancy research way of saying, oh, that's the thing that they're specifically going to create a little cell petri dish situation to see what happens, right? So all of those words, to analyze, to determine, to investigate, right? To consider, right? What do? They tell you what specific part of the main topic of those 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, these 5 steps here, right? From the gut bacteria to the white adipocytes and whatever goes on with metabolism at the bottom, right? Your next thing you got to figure out is which one of these actually matters, right? So does anybody want to unmute themselves and using the major keys I gave you, go into the practice passage itself and find out where they actually tell us the specific part of the main topic they intend to either determine, to investigate, to analyze, or are creating some kind of hypothesis on, right? So somebody kind of unmute yourself, and I want you to literally read the specific part of the main topic from the actual passage itself, because it's in there, and the major key is going to tell you exactly where to go. So anyone want to just go ahead and try?
I can go ahead and try.
All right, what do you got?
So it says, analyze the contribution of GPCR43 to energy regulation.
Wonderful. What does that tell you specifically? So if you're looking at the thing that I drew on the right side, right, what would you ask me to draw a circle around?
The active GCPR portion.
Bingo, right? So what have we done now? We figured out that this is the only part about the whole entire process or main topic that really was important, right? And so do you mind reading the whole sentence, include the word before analyze?
Yes, it says researchers generated GPCR43 deficient mice to analyze the contribution of GPCR43 to energy regulation.
All right, perfect. So the reason why I had you go back and do you mind just stating your name, where you're at, and your quick MCAT fact real quick?
I'm Cedra, and
Hi, Cedra.
hi, and I'm in. Do you mean like what place? Texas?
Where are you
State?
located right now? Because
Yeah,
we're all
I'm
remote.
I'm in Dallas, Texas, and
Dallas, Texas. Okay.
And I'm gonna take my MCAT in mid-September.
Mid-September. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, cool. So the question, or rather, the learning teaching point I was trying to make, right, where I had you. What was the major key I told you that helped you kind of find that phrase really quickly?
You were telling me to find keywords such as analyze or contribute or
analyze
something
or contribute.
Yeah.
Right. So the reason why I'm sorry to cut you off. So to analyze is a key word. If you find to analyze in any passage, 99% of the time, in my opinion, it's going to tell you what is the specific part of the main topic they're looking to dig into. Okay. But the real point I was trying to get at actually is a highlighting tip. High yield test takers highlight and attempt to always end the highlight with a verb or start it with a verb. The intention is if you highlight and the end of your highlight begins with a verb, right? That tells you this was done to this thing. If you end your highlight with a verb, this thing did this thing, right? And if you kind of stop and think about the pace of MCAT passages, you kind of need to know this thing did this thing was done to this thing. Is that kind of making a little bit more sense in terms of a nice little smart way to highlight? That was a direct question, not a rhetorical question. You still with me?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. So when you come on, assume that it's just you and I in the room until I kind of tell you like to go on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I heard that part.
Right. So it kind of makes sense if you like start and end your highlighting, because a lot of y'all highlight too much and highlight the wrong things. Right. So a nice tip you can take from today is start to like see what happens if you say, okay, cool, as much as I can, I'm gonna highlight, but I'm gonna highlight only when I either start or end the highlight portion of what I'm highlighting with a verb. Right. So that's a nice little tip that you guys can take. Okay. So thank you so much for helping me out with this portion. So you can go ahead and put yourself on mute. Okay. So great. So we figured out the main topic and the specific part of the passage we need to like find and look into, right? So we're going to take a brief detour and go back to working memory, and I'm going to point something out. I have not really used the word that they actually used in the passage to describe the receptor, GCPR 43, or the other condition eventually that we're going to talk about, GCPR 43 minus, right? I haven't used that. Some of you guys have highlighted it, right? And I'll tell you why I haven't bothered about it. And it comes back to what Andrew and I talked about at the very beginning, working memory, okay? So everybody pause whatever you're doing, stop, right? Let's take 15 seconds. We're going to just stop, right? Once we center ourselves, right, we're going to do a really brief exercise. I'm going to say a name, right? And I want you to reflect on the things that come to into your brain when I say it. And I want you guys to start chatting them. Throw them in the everyone chat, okay? So here we go. I'm going to throw out a word, and the word is receptor, right? Write out whatever the first thoughts that popped in your head in the everyone chat, please. GCPR, binding, ligand, blood, membrane, surface, symporter, binding, hormone, neuron, lipid, tyrosine kinase, more membrane, more binding, right? What's the point I'm trying to make here? It's the same point I've been trying to make the whole time. You have to be efficient with how you code your working memory, how you take everything from the passage and stick it in your head, right? So do you know how Kamanthi actually stuck GCPR 43 minus into his head? Simple. No receptor, right? Why? Because in my brain somewhere, I remember, what do receptors do? They bind things, they get activated, they have downstairs signaling, they're located on the membrane. I know that there's an extracellular portion of it if it's a GCPR, there's an effector. I already have this latent knowledge about receptors, about GCPR. I don't know anything about GCPR 43. I've never heard of it. It means nothing to me. So if I'm only thinking about and highlighting and thinking that this passage is about GCPR 43, right? I then have to remember, what is GCPR 43? What does it do? What does what to it? That's a lot of time and energy I'm spending. But if in my mind, I'm just like, oh, it's some receptor, right? I already know what that thing's gonna do. I already know that they might ask me a kinetics question about the affinity or the KD, right? And I can already start to predict a key thing that high test takers do, predict where the passage in the MCAT questions are gonna go by coding things in my brain and how I remember them, okay? So we've done a little bit of the checklist, we've done a little bit of extra high yield topics, so we're gonna go back to the checklist and we're gonna kind of basically go through the rest of it right now, right? So we found the main topic, right? It's this path thing on the side. The specific part we figured out was the receptor piece, right? Now we have to go through the last couple things. First, you wanna find the outcome of interest. And then you got to figure out how they're looking to measure it, right? So any of you guys that have like done any research or remember like high school, like biology, know that like I'm basically talking about the scientific method. And you probably have heard that if you use a scientific method on experimental passages, it's a lot easier, right? And one of you, I'm sure, if anyone has the courage, is going to ask, why did you start with the dependent variable first? Right? So if anybody has the courage, just go ahead and drop it in the chat just so that I see if anybody's curious why the first thing I look for when I'm breaking down the experiment is the dependent variable and not the independent variable. Because if you've ever done research, you typically start off with like, what am I really interested in learning about? And then figure out like how you want to measure it, right? So is it because you want to see the effect, right? Does it depend on, right? Great questions. It's actually a very simple kind of common sense question. How many dependent variables can you typically have in any experiment? One, right? How many independent variables can you have in an experiment? Many. What's easier to get confused by? One thing you gotta find or many things you gotta find? Right? The many is gonna confuse you, right? So I always tell students, find the dependent variable, find the outcome they're interested in looking at, and find out how they're looking to measure it, right? So I'll give you where you can find it first, right? So if anybody looks, and just unmute yourself, the first person that is able to find it, in that passage that we're doing, right? Look for where they say what they're looking, major key, to measure, right? And then just unmute yourself and tell us, what are they looking to measure in this passage and how are they looking to measure it?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. Hey, Tammy.
Hi.
Where are you located?
I'm actually from Brooklyn.
From where?
In Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, what part of Brooklyn?
Bushwick.
Bushwick. Wow, nice, nice. I'm from right around the corner in Crown Heights. But why don't you go ahead and tell us what you found? What are they looking to determine or to measure, and how are they looking to measure it?
Well, I first look at the graph and I see that is that body weight is being measured.
Ooh, okay. Why did you look at the graph, and where did you look at the graph? Like, tell me what told you to go there, and what did you go looking for?
I think it was like, from another professor who says like, while you're reading a passage, you know, to first take a glimpse of the graphs or pictures before reading the passage.
Perfect, perfect. And then you found the body weights, right? So where on the graph did you look to find the body weight or the dependent variable?
The vertical line.
The y-axis, right?
Mm-hmm, the y-axis,
cool.
Yes.
Perfect. So here's a nice little major key of how you can simplify every single experimental passage from now on, Tammy, right? Mm-hmm. If you know at some point you've got to find the outcome or the way they're measuring the outcome, which we call the dependent variable, right?
Yes.
And we know that it's always going to be the y-axis and there's only going to be one of them, right? Wouldn't it make it super easy to do a practice passage if you first looked at the y-axis on any graph they give you, identify what is it that they're looking to measure, the outcome, right?
Yes.
and then began to do the passage because you've already kind of figured out where they're going to end up. Now you're going to work backwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I like to tell students that as a way for them to, oh, wow, there's a cool way I can use the checklist that is not necessarily in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? That's jumping in at 3 and then going back to 1, right? You kind of see that?
Yes, I do have a question though.
Go for it.
Will they actually throw in like a trick question where the independent will actually be on the x-axis? I mean, not the dependent, the dependent variable. Oh, excuse me. The dependent variable will be on the x-axis. Will that ever happen or no?
No, so they can't, right? Because by definition, right? Remember back in the day, y equals mx plus b,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
right? Well, y equals mx plus b really meant is that the outcome y depends on the independent variable x, whatever number we multiply, or the slope m, and whatever additional factor that we need to add in to make things make sense, b. Yeah, there you go, right? So they can't make it the y-axis. Their hands are limited. You get it? What I'm saying? Like everybody on the call, I want y'all to take this in. The AMC's hands are literally tied behind their back. They cannot put the dependent or the outcome anywhere else on a question besides the y-axis. And I'm saying that so like vehemently, right? Because think about this, right? You got 5 minutes and you got a hard passage to do, right? Where do you start? I'll tell you where I start. Look at the figure, look at the y-axis. Y-axis tells me what the dependent variable is, right? I already know what the outcome of the experiment is.
Mm-hmm.
If I can figure out what the independent variables are, and I just look at the graph and I figure out the trend, I've given myself a 66% chance of getting that passage correct. Why? Because, okay, cool. The implicit questions are going to ask me, what is the outcome that is associated with some independent variable? That's a trend line on the graph, right? Only difference is I know that I'm looking for something, right? Everybody on the call, I need y'all to stop and listen here. I know what I'm looking for before I even open an MCAT passage. I have 7 things I gotta find, and I know what I'm gonna do with those 7 things when I find them. That's the difference between getting a 130, 131, 132, at least on Biobiochem, right? And then struggling through, right? Like, I really want to thank you because the question you just asked is really, really the question that gets at the core of how you can get a high score on the Biobiochem section, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what you're looking for. 7 things, at least on the experimental passages, right? So you can't ever be tricked because you know the dependent variable, they know where they're going to put it at, right? It's always going to be on the y-axis. Or you know the words that they're going to use to tell you. How did you find it did you use or look in the paragraph to find it at all?
Well, first I looked at the graph, and then
First you looked at the graph?
And then I read the 3rd paragraph.
And what did you see in the 3rd paragraph that confirmed it to you? Tell me the word, the verb that really got you.
Mice were fed a standard diet or high-fat diet.
All right, go up a couple words before that.
Analyze the contribution of the GPCR 43 to energy regulation.
All right, keep reading. That next sentence.
Oh, okay. The wild type and GPCR 43 minus mice were
all right, so pause. What did we say? GCPR minus, all that. What's that mean to us?
That they do not have the GPCR.
No receptor.
No
right?
receptor.
So from now on, anytime, hey guys, everyone that's on the call, from now on, anytime you read, either by yourself or interactively, we're not even going to say GCPR 43, no receptor. We're not going to say wild type, has receptor, right? We're going to simplify it. We're going to maximize our working memory because we know what receptors do and we know what not having one and having one means, okay? So read that again. So you tell me something about the condition with the receptor and not the receptor. What I'm trying to get you to see is, do you see a place where they said something about the word measured?
Yeah, measured weekly for 16 weeks.
Measured weekly for 16 weeks. Do you know why I knew to take you there? Because I knew whenever they say that the word measured, it's going to be in the part of the paragraph that's ultimately talking about one of 2 things. The outcome of interest or how they're looking to measure it. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions you have?
No, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. I hope that was helpful.
Yes.
All right. So now I want to just take a quick second and pause here. And what I want us to do is take a second and really talk about how they measure, right? And the reason we're going to talk about how they measure is actually we're going to do a real biochem content-ish type of lesson. And we're going to come out here and we're going to bring up the topic of how are you on your lab techniques, right? So real quick, I'm going to just start throwing things out there, and I just want people to just like in the chat, in the everyone chat, or out loud actually would be easier, to start shouting out what these things measure, right? Western blot, SDS page,
Weight, molecular amount.
Southern blot, what else can I do? DNA,
Affinity,
isoelectric focusing,
charge for amino acids.
There you go, charge, right? If anybody has any other lab techniques they want to just throw out also, go ahead, because I'm running out of them. Some of those oligomer, DNA oligomer ones, right? Those are doing what for complements is what they're trying to check, right? You might even get really fancy and get,
Protein.
chromatography, right? Anion /
PCR.
cation exchangers. Oh yeah, there you go. PCR. That's a good one. PCR. What does PCR check?
DNA, so part, so breaking it apart.
DNA presence. All right. And what if I switched it up on y'all and said RT-PCR? What am I checking if I've got that?
Reverse transcriptase.
Reverse transcriptase.
Focusing on the way of RNA and then changing it into the DNA.
RNA expression. Perfect. What if I said something about a cDNA bank? What am I really saying I got in my catalog?
The complement to the DNA strand. So
is it complement to the DNA strand, or is it complement to RNA strand?
That's it, right?
Only the coding genome, right? So why do we take, thanks guys. I really appreciate you guys all helping out. That was awesome. I love whenever we, I'm sure there's somebody that's on this call right now that might have heard what you guys said and learned something. So we're paying it forward, right? So that's a bunch of different lab techniques. So why did I say that, right? I said that because you know that one of the things that you're looking for, remember what I told y'all, like the big major key for how biochem can become easy is you're looking for stuff, right? So if you know you're going to look for how you're measuring stuff, and I told you isoelectric focusing is measured, is seen on there, or even a better one, right? Let me give you guys a better one that's even more clinically focused. We'll go there, right? If you look at an exam and you all of a sudden see, oh crap, I've got an SDS page, right? What are the two factors you think that they're going to be measuring? Anybody just hop out and tell me. Mass and charge, right? So let's say now you go up and you look at the title and you see it's about hemoglobin, right? Does anybody want to try and connect this concept and really want to be bold, connect where I'm trying to go? If I said they are looking at SDS page about mass and charge, and I brought up hemoglobin as the example. If anyone can make the connection, hey, if y'all, especially y'all who got exams coming up, right? Let's see what you got, right? Can you go from hemoglobin to why a researcher would be interested in using an SDS page that measures mass and charge, right? Let's make up a hypothetical passage right now. All right, so I've got somebody that said hemoglobin would have 4 bands, right? Or multiple.
Oxygen, so more to the mass.
Okay, cool. What if I added something else? And I said sickle cell. If I add sickle cell to that, right? What does that tell you about sickle cell? What do we know about sickle cell compared to normal hemoglobin?
The binding is different.
The binding is different, but what is fundamentally different between somebody who has it and does not have it on a genetic level? What kind of mutation exists? Right? We're gonna get a little molecular mutation. Is it a silent, missense, or nonsense?
It's a
missense.
It changes to something else. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So I've got it in the chat, right? So it's a glutamate, right? Glutamate is E. To, I believe, a glycine alanine. It's one of those hydrophobic ones, right? Let's call it alanine today, right?
Okay.
So now we find out that, you know, if you've got sickle cell, you had a mutation that got you to go from glutamate to an alanine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now that I've given you these little pieces of the main topic, and I told you initially how I planned on measuring it, does it become rapidly clear the kind of experiment that I'm trying to do to anybody? And if so, does anybody want to just shout out and kind of explain to the group what is it that I'm trying to connect for you guys by explaining the importance of knowing your lab techniques and how it can make it so much easier to do a passage?
The only thing I can think of is changing the size of the amino acid.
Exactly. So what I was trying to get at is there's a passage that you might get out there that is a bunch of cells, and you could end up with bands on it, right? So you might have a band right here, or you might have a band right here, band here, band here, band here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what these bands represent is these are different types of hemoglobin, right? So you guys have heard of sickle cell, right? There's also hemoglobin Bart's, hemoglobin E, hemoglobin C, whatever, right? But they differ by an amino acid change, right? And you guys have already hopefully seen this game already that the MCAT likes to do to see, do you know your amino acids? Do you know the properties and the consequences of their changes? Can you reason within the context of a topic? And can you analyze some data, right? So all these different bands, right, would represent the different types of hemoglobin, and the way they moved up would really be a function of their difference in charge, right? Because if it's a point mutation, right, do you really create a change really in the size of hemoglobin? No, not really.
No.
But if you change your amino acid, you can change the charge part of this equation, right? This is a nice example of how the way you measure something, the lab technique, right? I was able to create this little example in my head right now because I knew the lab technique that I picked. I picked SDS page. So I said, first, what does an SDS page do? It measures mass and charge. Next, I said, can I think of an example where I create a charge difference that I could represent in data, a picture of an SDS page as different levels, right? So I thought to myself, oh yeah, I remember from like this year in med school, we learned about different types of hemoglobin and now they're different. So I was like, cool, now I got a main idea, right? So how can you apply this to your own learning? You know what you're already looking for before you start the passage. You got to figure out what the main topic is. You got to figure out what are they looking to analyze, to determine, to assay, to investigate, right? The specific part. Then you got to ask yourself, what's the outcome of interest and how are they looking to measure it, right? There's 3 ways you can determine that. You can look at the y-axis directly because we already know most experiments only have one dependent variable. You can look in the paragraph where they literally say to measure, right? Or you can do the last thing we just talked about. You can use your understanding of lab techniques, the chemical and biochemical or physics properties that they cover, right? You can use that to get a better understanding of what outcome were they really interested in, right? If I'm using an affinity and ELISA to test something, right? I might have been interested in whether or not a protein was denatured or not, a 3-dimensional property of it, right? ELISA uses antibodies to measure and attach a 3-dimensional representation of the protein. Why would I use an ELISA if I wanted to test denatured versus normal? The 3-dimensional side of it. What I wanted to measure and how I measured it oftentimes are aligned. So if you have a good understanding of your lab techniques, you really know how people are going to try to measure, for example, an RNA expression experiment, right? A lot of y'all are going to get tripped up on examples of passages that really aren't talking about DNA, really aren't talking about protein, are really talking about RNA expression because they can give them to you as cDNA, or they can get really cute and give it to you as a small interfering nuclear RNA type of example, right? But if you have a good understanding of the techniques that are often used to measure RNA expression, right, it becomes easier for you to decipher that passage, okay? So we've talked a lot, I want y'all to notice, in terms of time, about 4 things, not a lot about the last 3 things. And that should reflect to you what I think the general importance or the difficulty in kind of navigating the passage where you got to focus your time on, right? You really want to get down what's the main topic, right? And I need you guys to recognize main topics are not always captured in a single line, like you see in Kaplan or TPR, whatever book you learn how to map from, right? Sometimes the main topic is really a process, a set of steps. Gut bacteria were implicated in the metabolism because they break down fiber, which produces short-chain fatty acids, which activate a receptor on fat cells, which then leads them to do something, right? We're going to measure that something, right, as body weight, right? The body weight of these mice is what we're going to use to measure, okay? Now what we have to do next is figure out what the independent variables are. And what I said specifically here is I want you to just list them. I use the word list because it's easier to make a list and you don't really have to think about it much. Because if you start to think about thinking through critically what the, it's going to confuse you. Just find out what are they looking to measure, what's the outcome, how are they looking to measure it, and then just list the variables of interest, okay? So does anybody want to just tell us or list to us the 2 variables of interest for the passage that I've been kind of discussing as we've talked? All right, cool. I've already seen them in the chat. I want somebody to just kind of talk to me about them because what we're going to talk about is where you could find them and how you can use them when you found them. Feel free to just unmute yourself and start talking. All right, so I've not heard anybody unmute themselves. So for the sake of time, I'm gonna just go ahead and say what was in the chat already. So the 2 independent variables here are going to be whether or not the receptor is present, right? So wild type versus GCPR43 minus, and whether or not they're fed a high fat diet or a low fat diet, okay? So what I wanna talk to you guys about is where you could easily find independent variables in 2 seconds without even thinking, right? So go ahead and look at the graph, everyone, right? Take a second and everybody look at the graph. And on the graph, I want you guys to look at the legend. Take a look at the legend and recognize what that tells you. And once you recognize what the legend actually tells you, the independent variable, I want you then to look over to the left at the y-axis, as Tammy, I believe, helped us realize that we could find the dependent variable on the y-axis. I want you to just stop and think about what you can then do if you had those simple 2 pieces of information on this passage, right? We've recognized the dependent variable is the weight of these mice, and there are 2 independent variables, whether the receptor is present or not, right? And then the other one is whether or not they're fed a high fat diet and a low fat diet. So this is the part where I'm really gonna ask one person to come on, be a brave soul, right? Because what you're going to do is you're going to help us bring home the core of what I'm trying to get at. How, if you knew what you were looking for, one of the hardest passages in the section bank becomes mad easy, okay? So if you just want to come on, all we're going to do is we're going to look at that graph, and you and I are just going to talk about what we have in that graph and how we can use it.
I can give it a try.
Okay, cool. Andrew, so are you looking at the graph?
Yes, I am. Figure 1, right?
All right, figure 1. So you looked at the legend, right? So in the legend, what were you able to parse out from the legend?
So it's basically dictating the difference between having a high fat diet or a standard diet between the wild type and the non-receptor.
Right. So if you were thinking about, I'm going to jump in here and cut, right? So not what it tells you, but what we were looking for. What were we looking for? What were we looking for when you started looking at the legend, right? We were looking for one of those 7 things, right? So of those 7 things, which one did you find in the legend?
Which one of the 7 things we're looking for in the checklist that I find in the legend? The general effects of the independent variables.
Right. So the legend actually tells you only what the independent variables are. Because what does the legend tell you? It tells you what each one of those lines actually stands for, right?
True.
So if you read that, what I see there is receptor, no receptor. That's 2 of those lines. Right? And then high fat diet and no fat diet. high-fat diet and low-fat diet as two of those conditions, right? They've
Yeah.
played a trick on me and they've mixed them up a little bit, right? They tried to trick me up, and we'll talk about that, but that's all they give you there. That's only your independent variables. So now imagine if you never talked or listened to me talk at all, right? And you knew you had to find one of those 7 things on that chart, on that checklist, right? Cold turkey, out of bed, looked at that passage, looked at the legend, and you saw no receptor, and you saw something about diet, right? And then you looked over to the left side and you saw body weight, right? Would you, how confident do you feel about your ability to just kind of like not even go back to the passages, to the top of the passage, and just look at the graph and kind of see if you can figure out what's going on? Would that be, if I gave you that as a starting point for the next passage we do, right? How do you feel about that versus wherever it is that you normally start passages from?
I feel if I do it in the vein that you're saying, it's easier to indicate what I could be finding. I feel if you just look at the trend, you might get confused of what's really happening. But if you know to start with the dependent variable and then kind of seeing how the independent variable kind of works along with it, you can kind of understand a little bit better.
All right, so I'm gonna share with everyone listening a massive insight that you personally just had while we were talking, okay? And I'll repeat it to you, maybe you didn't pick it up on it, right? What you said is next time that I go look at a graph, I'm not gonna look at the line and get confused and tricked. I'm gonna go to the legend or the y-axis, because I know, Kamanthi told me at some point, I gotta find an independent variable or a dependent variable. So they're not gonna trick me with the trend. I'm gonna look at the dependent variable on the y-axis. Okay, body weight. All right, I don't really know what y'all gonna do with the body weight, but let me go ahead and look over at the legend. Maybe I figure out something else. All right, so you've got this wild type and like GCPR receptor thing. So receptor, no receptor. Okay, cool. At this point, I have no clue what this passage is about, but if you're gonna measure something about the weight of something and you have a receptor as a dependent or as an independent variable, right? Andrew, what do you think the logical main idea of the passage I'm talking about would probably be about? What subject from all the things you studied with this hypothetical passage, right? It's a real passage in this situation, right? That has a dependent variable on the y-axis, that is body weight, and an independent variable that looks like no receptor or receptor, right? What do you think the main topic might be if you didn't know?
If I didn't know what the main topic would be, what do I think it would be if I just saw this information as it was?
Yeah.
Well, then I'll look at the trend. To be honest, I would see that body weight.
Don't look at the trend.
Okay.
Don't look at the trend. Just look at 2 pieces of information. Body weight. Right? So think about your body weight.
Okay.
Right? And I told you what are factors that affect your body weight, right? One thing that you might say is something to do with my metabolism, right? Right? So now I told you that the other piece of information you had was what? The other information you had was the presence or lack of a receptor, right? So maybe, I'm going to skip ahead so I can do this justice. This passage may have been about an attempt to analyze the contribution of some receptor to energy regulation. What do you think about that?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry, I missed that.
Just look at 3rd paragraph, right? Where it says to analyze the contribution of GCPR 43 to energy regulation, right?
Yes.
Right, so I'm going to highlight it for everyone that is on the call right now, right? So he's looking right here, right? And the exercise we're trying to get at, everybody, is simply this. Let me clear up some of this extra goober-gobber, right? So if Andrew only knew these 2 things, he had only known that this passage talked something to do with body weight, and he looked right here and he was like, oh, cool, GCPR, recognize that. That's receptor. Minus, oh, that's homozygous recessive. All right, so that means no. Wild type, got it. So these 2 things are basically something about some receptor. Right? So Andrew basically only looks here, and he's learned that Kamanthi said he's got a checklist of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things he's got to find on any passage. He knows that number 3 is what the outcome is. Number 4 is the way they're going to measure the outcome. And number 5 is a list of those independent variables. He also listened to Tammy say that, hey, the dependent variable, right, or really 3 and 4, can be found on the y-axis. He goes on the y-axis and he sees, body weight. Thinks to himself, body weight, body weight, body weight. All right, cool. I don't really know what to do with it, but all right, I'm gonna go look at the other side. And he sees something here and he notices this has to do with the receptor. So he goes, all right, cool. Somehow, some way, the rest of this passage has to somehow bridge a gap between a receptor and a body weight. I don't know how they're gonna do it, but it's fair to say that whatever way they do it might have to do with, say, metabolism, because I know that affects body weight, metabolism, right? Or I know about the receptor. Receptors have to do with cell signaling. So maybe the passage is about cell signaling, or I know about kinetics, right? All that KD stuff. So maybe this is a passage about kinetics. I don't know. Maybe this is a passage about microbio, maybe it's a mutation type of thing, right? And they're trying to figure out if like one cell line has a mutation somewhere, whether or not I understand my amino acids to proteins. Maybe that's what the connection that they're testing here, right? You guys starting to understand that these just could be literally, I could copy and paste these up here, right? And just simply change receptor and you got another passage immediately.
I see that.
Right? And so the lesson here is really the big lesson here is I've given you a list of 7 things that are the perfect things for you to keep in your working memory so you can think. You can't stop thinking just because I gave you a list of 7 things. You got to keep thinking, right? So if you have, for example, 5 minutes left and one hard passage to do, right? So this is another lesson you guys are getting, right? How to triage. This is how I triage. If I was looking at this passage, I'd look here and say, all right, body weight. Okay, looks like receptor and looks like diet. Receptor. All right. I don't know what this passage might be about, but I'm guessing something about metabolism. So I'm going to assume that the 33% of the discrete questions they give me are going to have something to do with metabolism. So pay attention to that. I'm then going to analyze this graph. And the way I analyze the graphs is using something very simple, right? So again, this is one of those moments where I say, like, if you weren't like paying attention and I'd bored you a bunch, just stop, write this down, think about this. And Andrew, you and I are going to try and work through this exercise using the graph at the bottom, right? So the way you analyze data is very simple. You look at any 2 conditions, and most importantly, major key, you've got to make sure that they differ by 1 variable only, because you can then turn around and look at the outcomes associated with those 2 variables and say whatever conclusion you can make based on their difference or lack of difference is due to the singular outcome. Let me say it one more time and slowly. 2 different conditions differing by only 1 variable, right? So you can only differ by not having the receptor, right? But you can't differ by not having the receptor and being on a different diet. So if you got a different receptor, you got to be on the same diet. If you got a different diet, you got to be on the same receptor. 2 conditions, 1 variable. Therefore, we can look at the difference in the outcomes and say whatever the difference in those outcomes is due to that 1 difference, okay? So this is how we're going to triage this passage in the next 5 minutes as we close. We're going to come here and we're going to say this is a passage about body weight. It looks like one of the variables you're looking at is receptor, right? And another one that they're looking at is the type of diet that you have, right? We're first going to look at all the conditions where you have the same diet, standard diet, right? But differ only by your receptor. Okay, cool. We've gotten that part. So now we're going to look at the circle and the square. Circle and square. And what does that tell us? That tells us that the square, no receptor, is going to equal higher body weight, right? So now that we figured out that that condition equals that, obviously we know the opposite. If you have the receptor, your body weight is going to be lower, right? And most critically, this is the part that students often miss, right? the reason why we're able to even say this, why we're able to conclude this and answer the explicit question they're going to give us is because we looked at one condition, right? These two variables, the circles and the squares. The only difference between them is what? The receptor. Why? Because they were both fed the standard diet. That way we can conclude that the square, no receptor, leads to a higher body weight, and the circle, receptor, leads to the lower body weight. Recognize, again, I'm not using the word GCPR at all. Or even GCPR 43, or 43 minus, or even wild type. I'm just talking in very simple terms. No receptor or receptor. Why? Because I know that those words capture everything I need to know about those topics, because I'm trying to be effective with my working memory. All right? So now that we've done that for that condition, now we got to look at the other condition, standard diet and fat, right? So now we got to look at the square and the triangle. Why? So I'm going to clear this. So if anybody needs to take notes, please take notes at this moment, if you're taking notes on your own, before I clear my notes. Clearing them now. All right, so next we're going to look at standard diet compared to high fat diet. And Andrew, do you want to explain to me why I connected those two rather than any other two conditions in order to figure out diet?
Because like you said before, you're not going to change two conditions or two variables, you change one. So now you're focusing on the same non-receptor, but now you're changing it from standard to the high-fat diet.
Bingo. So what Andrew said is we're looking at the non-receptor. And for guys who are like, wait, where's non-receptor? Non-receptor is GCPR 43 minus, right? But Andrew knew I've got to be optimizing my working memory, so I'm just going to think about it as no receptor. And he knew that in order for me to analyze diet, I've got to look at the condition that has them at different, right? So we look at the square and the triangle. So that is the square and the triangle. And then it confirms that what? The effective diet is that if you have high fat diet, you have higher body weight. Okay? So we just triaged one of the most difficult Biobiochem passages on the entire AAMC practice passage section bank, right? You can look online, they have videos and stuff on it, like there's entire Reddits, but it felt easy, or easier, I'm sure, as you reflect on it. And not because I like taught you anything, it's just because we just changed what we were doing. We weren't reading the passage, we were just checking it out. Why? Because we had a list. For what? To find some stuff. Why? Keep our working memory kind of like fresh and clean, in order to figure out what it is that we've got to critically think through, or the content we've got to access to answer a question. Okay, so Andrew, I'm going to ask you to help me out here, okay? So do you have the annotate function available on your end? Because I'm going to ask you a couple questions about figure 2, and we're going to try and figure out, kind of analyze what's going on.
Okay.
All right, so just see if you can get the annotate feature on. It'd be great if you can.
Hold on. How would I even do that? Trying to see. Do you know where I can?
So
right.
Here, let me see if I can give you access to remote control. Andrew P. All right, cool. So you should have just gotten a request for remote control. We should give you a couple fancy tools. And in the meantime, I want to just put my email. Oh, never mind.
Okay.
So you have to click at the screen a little bit. Is all you have to do.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay.
Cool. So, all right. So just kind of get accustomed to it. Write a couple things down, and while you're getting accustomed, I just want to go ahead and say my email out loud to anyone who has to leave. My email is elitemdtrack@gmail.com. It's ELITEMD, the letters M and D, track as in the one you run on, TRACK @gmail.com. I'm going to have my contact information at the end, but I wanted, in case anybody didn't get a chance to get that. So Andrew, are you ready?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to be looking at figure 2, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
I want you to find the answer by looking at the data, okay?
Okay.
All right, can you tell me whether there is a significant difference in the presence or absence of acetate in terms of its effect on the outcome of interest for experiment 2? So that's a compound question I asked you, so I'm going to break it down for you.
I think I got what you're saying, bro. Okay.
So first part, I need you to find the outcome that they're going to look at in experiment 2, right? And the second thing I want you to tell me is the 2 independent variables they're looking at in experiment 2.
Okay.
And I need you to kind of help me figure out this question that I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
If I have, let me see, acetate, what's up? What happens? All right, so fill that
gap for you.
Checklist for me, yeah.
So first you said, is it significant? I think that was the first part that you brought up.
The place I'd start is to figure out what's the outcome. Right? I asked the question very differently. I asked the question the way the MCAT's going to ask you, an explicit question. So I just asked you a question that is explicitly about that passage, that picture right on the paper, right? So you got the chance to bank 33% of this passage right now, okay?
Okay.
So if you're going to figure out not how I asked it, but how you think through it, right? You got a checklist, right? What on the checklist is even the highest on the checklist?
One on the checklist is where, I'm sorry? One more time?
What's the highest, closer to number 1 on the checklist?
Well, 1 is main idea, as you said before, but the highest for this would be, I believe, find the dependent variable.
Dependent variable, so start there. Tell me what the dependent variable is.
The dependent variable would be the radioactive glucose uptake, the y-axis.
Radioactive glucose axis, y-axis, perfect. All right, then tell me the 2 independent variables of interest in this passage.
Insulin and acetate.
Insulin and acetate, cool. So we found 2 things. And now I asked you to draw a conclusion, make an explicit finding from that picture on what happens when you have acetate. So what I want you to do is I want you to actually annotate your way as you answer this question on the screen so that you can pay your learning forward and let everybody figure out how you work through that problem. So go ahead.
So the way I would approach it is based on the difference in insulin and acetate. I see that for the wild type specifically, when you add acetate, it makes a significant difference. So there's an actual change here. So when you're adding acetate, or when you have the plus, for example, I would see that this is a drop off. So I would think that acetate would have a negative or an antagonistic type of effect on the radioactive glucose uptake specifically here.
Okay. So Andrew, let me ask you a quick question. So you had a 25% chance, well, technically a little bit more because you got way more rows and stuff, right? So some permutation of columns to look at. Why did you pick those 2? And don't tell me it's because of the little bar on top of it. Beyond that, I saw that specifically the one change, you said the one variable change would be in this case of adding the acetate. Therefore, if it was wild type, these 2 are the same compared to this difference. So if I'm able to see this change to be more positive, then I'll be able to see its effect on the insulin or on the actual wild type itself. In the others, it's either none or 1. In this, you'd be able to actually see that it can have, once again, an antagonistic effect or even just a negative effect on the graph. And we can actually see the difference here. This is just a helpful tool to help you realize it's significant, but I can actually see the change here as well. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much. How do you think that went?
In terms of how do I feel about going about it this time around?
Yeah, you're learning. How do you feel about the learning you just had today?
I definitely think I think it's helpful because I did know about this star, for example, or about certain things about dependent and independent variable, but I never thought of it having to only have one variable change. I didn't think about it having that one change that can make the big difference.
Perfect, awesome. So I'm gonna come in here and I'm just gonna annotate a little bit, and I'm gonna actually add, Andrew, hang on the line because there's a comma to what you said that we need to talk about, right? So there's what you said, and there's a comma to that statement, and you just hang on the line, but I'll catch everybody up to what he said, right? So the first thing he knew is I asked him a question about acetate, but initially, right, what he had to do first? He had to figure out what the researchers were looking to examine, right? because that would give them a clue about what's going on, right? So they're examining the relationship between some receptor and insulin sensitivity, right? The conditions they're looking to put them in is what their outcome is. What are they looking to measure, right? They're looking to measure the uptake of glucose, or you could have looked at the y-axis and said, oh, the uptake is that, right? Cool. So we then clear the screen. So now we have an idea of what we're looking at. We know what our independent variables are. We know the receptor is 1. We know acetate. Oh, wait, we forgot to, in the presence of or absence of both insulin and acetate, right? So Andrew, this is where your comma comes in, right? Okay. So the comma is, what I asked you was what the effect of acetate was. What you told me is what the effect of acetate is, but, comma, in the presence of insulin. Because let's come over here and look at the other condition here when we don't have insulin. But we do have that same difference, right? So we can say, cool, this is easy for us to look at. We can look at, so for people that are still trying to process the way you look at data, right? We'd say, look, let's go look at the wild type, right? Let's look at the condition where the wild type doesn't have insulin and doesn't have acetate. We look at this like right there, right? So let me actually change, let me make a better color scheme and be more clear. So I just want to catch everybody up, right? So anyone that's still kind of like, how do you process the data? You go to the wild type, say, okay, cool. Wild type, so this has the receptor, but it has no insulin, it has no acetate. You then say, okay, cool, let me just take a look at when you just add only acetate, right? So that's this condition here, right? Why is it that condition? Because they differ by only one thing, and that one thing is acetate. Oop, I didn't draw that well. They only differ by acetate, right? So we're basically saying it's two conditions, the red and the orange, but there's only one difference between them, the blue box, acetate, right? So Andrew, the reason I told you that there was a comma to what you said is that the conclusion you told me was that, yes, there's a significance, right? When you have the wild type condition, and the only thing that you have that's different is the acetate. So you can say that the effect, right, of having acetate as a wild type, right, is a decrease in the uptake of radioactive glucose in the presence of insulin, right? Right. The reason that's important is if we look at the other condition, if you're a wild type, right, you only differ by acetate, but now you do not have any insulin. What do we see? Do we see any difference here?
No.
No, right? So what do you think the MCAT would have done? Do you think they'd have added in the question, do you think the question stem would have added a comma and something in here?
Yes.
Do you think you'd have read it the first time you read it through? Like, honestly, like, would you have even noticed it that was there?
I'd probably be confused of what the extra information was coming from if I didn't look at it more specifically.
Look at more specifically. And do you know what's number, I think 1 or 3 maybe in this question bank, or this question, maybe 4, can't remember. I don't have the questions pulled up, right? One of these questions, somebody pull it up. Somebody mentioned who's looking at the questions, just drop it in the chat, just kind of as a learning thing, right? There's a question that literally asks you a very explicit question. Oh, wow, it's question number 1.
The table.
Right, right? So question number 1 apparently is a very explicit question, right? About this passage that was meant to confuse you on that tiny little detail of in the presence of this, right? And where would you picked it up? Right here. They told you, right? They told you all the conditions that they were looking at, right? If you read carefully, they said that they were looking for the relationship between the receptor, but they were also going to incubate it, right? Incubate, for all of y'all that want another major key, incubate in your mind to trigger a line that says, yo, independent variable coming up, right? Why would you incubate? It's question number 10. So it's the first one out of the packet of the questions. Sorry to divert. So the question that is related to the concept I'm teaching right now is the first question in the pack, but it's actually question number 10. But yeah, so incubate independent variable automatically, right? Because it's legit what they're gonna do, right? If you pause and think about any of y'all that worked in the lab and your PI told you, hey, I need you to incubate 2 cell lines with some bullshit that was different between the 2 of them. You had to spend all that time doing it. It's because they were trying to check out some independent variable for their experiment. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here real quick because I was supposed to run until the 7 o'clock mark. At 7 o'clock, I'm free until the 7:30 mark. For those that want to, I have 30 minutes to actually go through all the questions, but I wanted to just pause real quick and skip ahead to where my info is at. There it is. That's where my info is at, to give people a chance to kind of get that down. And so if anyone is okay, I just want to get at least 10 okays of people that want me to stay until the 7:30 to go through the questions. And then I'll kind of go through those and we can maybe answer a couple more questions. Okay, I think we got, okay, I think that's enough, all right? So I guess we're gonna stay and do the questions, all right? So here is, for any of you guys that have to leave, the link to this presentation is actually in whatever post, wherever you found it. Please, if you want to get access to the recording of today's session, which I actually decided to make halfway through the session, thanks to some of you guys asking the question, please email me so that I capture your email, or message me on whatever way you found out about me. And if you're gonna leave, please pay it forward and remind people that this is a session I hold every Sunday, different passages, different topics, sometimes cars, sometimes physics, you never know. But the big thing is the link with the presentation has my annotations. They're very crude, but if you've listened along today, you're gonna see those and they're gonna mean something to you. So I will go ahead and pause right here as I switch over to the questions. And what I do ask is, in order for us to do the questions and for it to be a little bit more interactive, I just simply ask that in my private chat, 5, 6 people just kind of volunteer. If not, I'm just gonna call out 6 people randomly, and we're gonna do the questions together. Or actually, what did I do? I did that wrong. All right, cool. I've got 1. I'm not gonna really start until I get 3, and I'm only gonna be here until 7:30. So I'm very stubborn, guys. That's a fun fact you'll learn about me. So let me get 2 more volunteers and then we can get started. All right, I've got 2, 3. Can I get 3 more? 4. All right, cool. I think we need 1, 2, 3. All right, cool, perfect. So I'm gonna just name out the people that I got in order. And just you remember the order and you remember when it's your turn, right? So I have Jaleesa has got number 1, Andrew P's got number 2, Oriane, sorry if I mispronounced your name's got number 3, Matita has got number 4, Melissa, you've got number 5, Noma, you've got number 6, okay? And so keep your number in line, and then the other people that you can just, you're on deck, Stephanie A and Afreen, Ahmad, Malik, you guys are just on deck in case any of the other people decide that they don't want to go, okay? So whoever is up first, just unmute yourself and let's get started.
Okay.
All right, cool. Thanks to Lisa, you've been super helpful today, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead and start off by giving you a big hint, right? This is an implicit question, right? When I write implicit question now, after today's lesson, what does that mean to you?
I guess it's using what's in the passage. I'm not sure.
All right, so if I said something is implied, would it be, it's outside the passage, right?
Yeah.
So what's that telling you you're gonna need to think about when you go into the question?
Well, thinking about like content that I may know, how this might relate it to something outside.
Right, or maybe the thing that they tell you, that outside new piece of information they're gonna give you, maybe you have to stop and think about how does that connect to the passage? How do we go from outside to inside the passage? All right?
Okay.
That's what we're gonna be trying to do in this question, okay? So what I want you to do, I want you to read the question, read it out loud, And then what I want you to do is take a second and try to rewrite that question and say it out loud in your own words. So take a second and then start whenever you're ready.
I have to read it out loud, or you're gonna read it out loud?
I can read it out loud. I'll read it out loud, right? So,
Okay.
which table shows the expected body weight? So I'm gonna just highlight first as well. Which table shows the expected body weights of the wild type or the GCPR 43, right? So what they're asking us is, well, actually, I'll let you guys figure that out. Fed a high-fat diet, right? While housed in a conventional condition or a germ-free condition, right? So can you go ahead and take a second and ask yourself, what does that actually mean? We write the question, but remember, what kind of question is this?
This is implicit.
Implicit. So what does that mean to us if it's an implicit question?
So we're going to take the new information and relate it back to what's been given to us in the passage.
Okay, exactly. Not just know that it's an outside piece of information, but our task, right? So if you guys are writing down notes, right? Like write down, if I get an implicit question, my task for answering an implicit question is, how do I get that thing that was outside the passage into this damn passage, right? That's basic. 33% of every passage you get, that's your job. Got something that's not here, how do I fit it in there? If I could give you the most basic way to get 33% of the questions right on a passage, is that it ain't here, it's gotta be what I gotta do, okay? So now that I've said that, Jaleesa, can you just restate the question as you see it in order for it to fit the passage?
Yeah, so like for 16 weeks, at 16 weeks, what's the body weight of someone with the receptor versus someone without the receptor on a high-fat diet with conditions such as conventional or germ-free conditions?
All right, out of that, what does not fit in the passage? What was not in the passage?
Germ-free was not in the passage.
Germ-free. All right, so it's an implicit question. An implicit question is about something that was not in the passage. And now we got to figure out how to get it in the passage. So what are you going to try to, what's not in the passage? So I want you to restate it all as one sentence, right? That reads like this. What wasn't in the passage, right? And how am I going to fit it in the passage, right? So I want you to take a second. Then when you're ready to answer restate the question, or actually give yourself the answer to the question, really, you're going to restate it as, what out of that whole question you read was not in the passage, and how did you fit it into the passage? So go ahead and go for it when you're ready.
So germ-free wasn't in the passage, and I can fit it in there because when I think of something being germ-free, you alluded to it earlier about neuroreceptors as well as the good bacteria being gone.
All right, so walk me from the beginning to the end. So get used to try to plan your thinking from start to beginning. Don't ever do plug in at middle of the point, right? Think the thought from the start to the end, right? So you have a thought that's spot on, but I want you to take a second and articulate it from the beginning of where you think that thought should start all the way to the end. And remember, your goal is something wasn't in this passage and I got to get it in the passage. So go for it. You have the answer. I just want you to say it from the beginning.
Okay, so I guess I'm pulling it from a sentence in the passage. So wild type and non-receptor mice were fed a standard diet or a high-fat diet, and their body weight in grams were measured weekly for 16 weeks. So at 16 weeks, they're also putting in another type of mice.
Is it another type of mice and putting them in
another
a different condition?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Another condition, which is germ-free. And how is this affecting body weight? Did I do
All right,
that
so how are we going to put that into, how are we going to fit that in? How are we going to round that? So let's go with the germ-free, right? Germ-free, you said, remember, you have to fit it into the passage, right? So germ-free, what part of the passage, remember that little thing I drew on the right side that was the main topic?
Right, yeah, so
Do you remember what it was? What was the first thing on that list?
Oh, I don't remember the list, to be honest.
All right, so go to the very top of the passage. Are you looking at the passage?
Yeah, I'm looking at the passage. So
right,
yeah.
Go to the very first beginning, and so what's the first thing that you saw at the very beginning?
Human intestinal tract.
They had what?
Wait, so basically these receptors are expressed in white adipose tissue. They activate G protein couple. Am I in the right space where you want to know?
So go to the very first paragraph is where I want you to go.
The human
First paragraph, right?
tract is inhibited by.
All right, so actually pause, stop. Let's take a moment. Let's take a deep breath, breathe out, right? Let's figure out what we're trying to do and we're trying to go, okay? We've been asked, and so you see what you're feeling right now, or maybe I might be misinterpreting, right? Like this is what's happening. This is what AMC passages do to you. It gets you thinking too fast. Like you forgot you might have even forgotten what germ-free had to do with this question, right? If some of y'all sitting on the slide, right? It's very easy to forget what the first question I asked was, right? The first question I asked is, we have to find the thing that's outside of this passage, right, Jaleesa? What was that thing that we found that was outside the passage?
Yeah, germ-free condition.
Germ-free condition, right? So that's odd. So now we have to first put it into the passage, right? What about the passage or everything that I've talked about kind of seems like similar to germ-free? It could be a single word even.
Are you talking about the gut microbiota?
Bingo, gut microbiota. That's where I was trying to get you to go, right? Now what you just did is you just took something that was outside of the passage, germ-free condition, and you stuck it in the passage. How did you stick it in the passage? For people that aren't following, if you raise a mouse in a germ-free condition, how's it going to get gut bacteria?
It's not.
It's not. So if it doesn't have any gut bacteria, is anything going to catabolize those fibers we talked about? Is there any gut in the bacteria to break down? Remember we said first what? We said that there were gut bacteria.
Right, that it was breaking down.
And they broke down some fibers. Yeah. And those fibers did what? They turned into short-chain fatty acids, right?
Right.
And those short-chain fatty acids did what? They turned on a signal, right? They turned on a signal that was a GCPR, right?
Yes.
So if you turn on the GCPR, then we remember like the mice that had the receptor, were they lighter or fatter?
The ones that had the were hold on. They were lighter.
They were lighter. So if they were lighter, what was going on with their fat cells?
It was breaking them down.
Fat breakdown, right?
Right.
Fat breakdown. And how did we measure that outcome?
We measure that outcome by looking at their body weight, measuring
and their
their
body weight moved in which direction? If fat breakdown was happening.
Yeah, for the it was decreasing. Wait.
Decreasing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to make sure we all are on the same page, right? So this is the passage here. Elisa, can you see the passage? Are you looking at the Zoom now?
Okay, yes, now I am.
All right. So you see what's in red?
Yes.
That's the passage. All right. See out here? See me writing germ-free?
Yes.
Is the germ-free in the passage right now?
No.
No. So how are you going to get it into the passage?
We've got to, put the arrows.
Right. So if you are in a germ-free condition, right, do you have any gut bacteria?
No. So it's going to, it's going to basically block this regulation.
Regulation. So remind me again, what was the specific part of this passage that we were looking at?
We were looking at how body weight changed for...
No, like the passage at the very top, right? Which piece of this little chain were they really, really looking at?
Oh, you're talking about the fatty acid chains?
No. I'm saying of all these steps from gut to fiber to short chain to receptor to fat breakdown to body weight, which one was the specific part of the topic that they were actually focused on?
Dang, I wish I had
the signaling GCR.
The PCR, the receptor.
The receptor, right?
Yeah.
And so do you guys remember the two independent variables that we found at the very beginning of this lesson? One of them was receptor, right?
Right. One's receptor, one's without the receptor.
One's without the receptor, right? Or so that's with or without. Let's use this one, right? So remember, what kind of question are we doing right now, Jaleesa?
Implicit.
Implicit. And what's the task that we have to accomplish on an implicit question?
We need to take new information and put it into the passage that we've given.
All right, cool. We're going to walk through this and we're going to try and figure out, right? So if I have germ-free condition, what do I not have?
You don't have gut microbiota.
If I don't have gut microbiota, which one do I not have?
Then you're not gonna have. You're not.
Walk me step by step.
You won't have any type of like fiber.
All right. And then what am I not going to be able to make?
Then you can't make the SCF.
What can I not do?
And you won't have a signal.
And what kind of condition do I look like?
Oh, wait. You're gonna look like the one without the receptor.
One without the receptor. And what is the passage called? The one that without the receptor? What's it called in the passage? What's the words that they use? They use G.
GPCR 43 --
minus.
Sorry, yeah.
Here's the magic, guys. This is my little party trick. This is what this question's saying. If you raise bacteria, or if you raise mice in a condition that doesn't have any bacteria in it, right? They can't get any bacteria in them. Effectively, even if they did or didn't have the receptor, it's off functionally, right? Which the receptor being off or receptor not even being there, it's all the same thing, right? So what they're saying is germ-free equals GCPR 43 minus, or no receptor. Now, Jaleesa, do you remember what the outcome that they measured and how they measured it?
The outcome was measured, and you're talking about body weight being the outcome and how they
body weight was how it was measured, right? And when you had no receptor, what happened to your body weight?
It should have increased.
Should have increased, right? So, Jaleesa, I want to thank you very much for helping me, and I'm gonna let you. Do you want to continue, or do you want to take a pause and like let somebody else jump in here?
I don't mind continuing.
All right, cool. All right, we'll continue, but I want to take a quick pause and give you guys a quick lesson, right? What's the first thing I mentioned before when we started this lesson? What was the very first thing I mentioned? Anybody can mention you can unmute yourself and mention the first word I mentioned when I started talking about this lesson on how to approach Biobiochem. Please, somebody unmute yourself, and Oriana, just unmute yourself and we can chat real quick as well. Just come on and let's chat. You said working memory. You're up next, I think, anyway, so go ahead.
You mentioned working memory.
Working memory. Introduce yourself. Where are you at?
Houston, Texas.
Houston, Texas. I love Houston. One of my favorite. Great music, great food. I can keep going on, right? So, Dallas too. All right, cool. We've got Dallas on the line. All right. So, working memory, right? So, working memory was the first thing that I talked about, right?
Yes.
So we've been on the call talking about the passages and stuff since I believe 6:30, so about an hour. No, not 6:30, since 5:30. So about 2 hours, right?
Yes.
And we've talked a lot, right? And would you say over the last 5 minutes, Jaleesa's been in a stressed condition?
Yeah, a bit.
She's talking in front of 36 people right now that she's never met, talking to a guy she just met today, right? Doing one of the hardest passages in the AMC section bank, right? Isn't that stressful?
Yes.
Right? But do you know what she still remembered as I asked her all these questions? Did you notice the last couple of things that she said when I asked her? I asked her a couple of things. I asked her, do you remember what the name of the condition was that represent no receptor? She waited a pretty long time to tell me GCPR, right? I asked her, okay, cool, germ-free, once she got this little, germ-free means off, right? I asked her, off means what? She said, no receptor, easily. I asked her, what was the outcome, right? She stumbled a little bit, but quickly said, body weight. And then asked her, do you remember what happened in the passage when the no receptor condition happened? She said, yeah, it went up. what do you hypothesize was the reason why she was able to, after 2 hours of listening and thinking and talking and about 5 minutes of being in a stressed condition, still remember the key aspects of a hard-ass passage?
It was her working memory.
Working memory. And what did she do? What did she do to like actually, what was the key thing that she did to make it able to actually make her able to do that?
We'll select 7 things that she didn't know.
Why 7?
Because that is what your working memory can hold.
Bingo. Right? That's all this lesson really is about for how you tackle biochem passages. Right?
Mm-hmm.
First thing I told you at the very beginning of this lesson is to realize, what's this exam really about?
About critical reasoning.
Critical reasoning. Right? Did we talk about a single science topic today? About biochem really in depth?
Not really.
Not really. Did we answer this question? Is Jaleesa about to answer this question, do you think, without actually using any science about GCPR, any microbiology, any cell signaling?
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Well, she had to bring outside knowledge about, recognizing key terms like GPCR.
Right. And when she's, what's the word that she kept using for the independent variable?
For the independent variable?
Yeah, she kept saying receptor, right?
Yes.
So she didn't even bring in outside knowledge about GCPR. She might not even really have already read that chapter.
Right.
But what did receptors do? Name a couple things that come to your mind when you think receptor.
Activation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What else? Where are they usually located?
Within the cell.
On the cell, right?
Yeah.
Kinetics, affinity, right? Binding,
Mm-hmm.
right? So she wasn't really using biochemistry. Like, not really. I mean, kinda. Not the hardcore stuff that you have to sit there and sweat through.
Yes.
I mean, the 2 questions that pop up that are discretes, maybe she might need to, but these other 4 questions, the 66% of the exam that's about, can you critically think, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you don't really need any science to do. On top of that, the best way you can do it is you've got to be able to think through the critical thinking that you need. In order to do that, you got to like always know like, hey, I got to be efficient with my working memory. And for me, the core of the strategy is, look, we know what we're looking for every time, right? When Andrew now goes and looks at a graph, he knows 2 things. Legend tells me independent variable. I can look over, see the dependent variable. If I'm going to analyze any data, I know any 2 conditions have to differ by only 1 variable, and I can't get confused if they told me the presence of 2 other independent variables, right?
Right.
You know what you're looking for. You have a list, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about that approach to a passage? Reflect on that approach and like tell me how that's going to make you like different in terms of how you approach your own passages, because I want this to be really a collaborative learning experience, right? I unfortunately have gone a lot longer, and I'm probably going to come off around the 35, but I just kind of want you to reflect, because somebody else might have approached passages the same way you do, right? And might learn from what your reflection on today's lesson has been. So is that okay if you do that? Because you already raised your hand to help out with the question. So this is the next question that was up. And Jaleesa, thank you so much for helping. You can go ahead and put yourself on mute and relax.
Okay, so the way, everything that you said, I will definitely include it in my approach. But along with that, I think it's really helpful to maybe take some quick notes on the graphs, like checking the trends that are going on. And just like how you mentioned, identifying the dependent variable and the independent variables. And if you increase this, what is the outcome and stuff like that.
Good. I appreciate you sharing that. Honestly, that's the thing I love about having people collaboratively answer questions is I hadn't really thought about that as something that should be a learning lesson, right? To maybe consider, and I just got a question in my private chat, right, of whether or not I recommend looking at the graph initially, right? And my response is, this is just a recommendation, guys. It's just it's in a general approach. Do with it as you want, right? and learn that there's very different ways you can do it. For example, you might want to start by looking at the charts, right? Doing what I mentioned, noting the dependent variable and independent variable, but doing what you just mentioned, which is writing down a couple notes on what those are. Write down, oh, I noticed what my dependent variable was, what my independent variable is, and jot whatever relationships you could note. Oh, when the receptor was in there, the body weight was high. When the high-fat diet was given, the body fat was high, right? Is that what you were trying to get at?
Yes.
All right, can I tell you something really cool?
Yeah.
If you keep doing that, do you know what you actually do? You actually answer 2 questions every time that are going to be on your exam, every time, just by doing those things. There's going to be 2 explicit questions that are explicitly going to ask you. Here, let me see if I can find them while we talk. They're going to explicitly ask you, that's a discrete, there it is. Well, no, kind of. This is a implicit. Here it is, right? Conclusion, figure 2, right? That one is more similar, but you see what I mean? Like if you had looked at this figure, right? And do you want to actually do this question with me?
Okay.
All right, cool. So look at this figure and tell me what you would know.
Figure number 2?
Yeah.
So as we mentioned, we said that in the presence of acetate, for the wild type, there is a significant decrease in the glucose uptake. Also,
right, so let me jump in here real quick.
Yes.
Let's remember, right? Like, let's approach it the way you'd have approached it as if you'd never seen it before, right? What's the first thing you'd have looked for?
First thing, what am I seeing the y-axis here?
All right, and what's that? What does that tell you?
Glucose uptake. So
not what does it what does it say? What does it tell you? Remember, we're starting with a checklist. Now we're not looking at what the passage tells us, right? What is it? What are we looking for? If we look at the y-axis,
what is it? Like the main idea?
It's a dependent variable, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, sorry.
Right? I'm trying to get across to you that it doesn't matter. I don't care what this says. It could say whatever. Honestly, I can blank it out like this. I don't care what it says. I honestly don't. I care what it is. My dependent variable. That's all I care about it for. Right? So stop reading the passage. Start using the passage. Right? Another lesson that you can pick up. Right? So let's try this again. So you look at the passage. You look at the y-axis. It told you that dependent variable was uptake of glucose. Right? We got that part. Right?
Yeah.
And then what's the second thing that you're going to be looking to look for in any kind of figure analysis?
The independent variable.
Independent variables. And remember I said to list them. It just makes it a little easier on your brain, right? So we're going to list them. So it's number 1. What's the first independent variable that you notice?
Insulin.
Insulin. What's the second one that you find?
Acetate.
Acetate. Any more?
Well, wild type versus.
All right. What's that? That's not a condition. That's not an independent variable. What does that independent variable actually mean?
No, yeah, something that you're manipulating.
What I was trying to get at, sorry, is the last is just receptor, right?
Receptor.
So I'm trying to get you not to even think about this. You keep saying wild type, right? I don't really know or care that it's wild type either. Right? If I blank this out and I ask you, what's the really fundamental difference between those 2 conditions? You say it's what? Whether or not they have a receptor.
Right.
Right? So I want you to start thinking and saying, because the reason I'm making a point of this is you realize the reason why you said it to me is because that's how you think it. And if you think it that way, you're wasting all that working memory when you're doing passages. Thinking about and remembering wild type, right? It's these small little habits you never really think about of how you think that get you speed, especially when you're trying to answer these questions quickly, right? Because for me, what I was trying to get you to see is all this falls down to just this little list. All right, uptake is the dependent variable. These are my independent variables, boom. All right, cool. Now I gotta get some basic relationships, right? So let's start with receptor, right? So I'm gonna compare 2 conditions. All right, we are gonna compare, right? Which bars I should compare here to figure out, right? If acetate is suppressed, right? in wild type, right? But not in these kind of things, right? So we're gonna try to answer this question together, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so walk me through how you're gonna look at the graph. Because remember, at this point, theoretically, we haven't even really looked at this question, right? Theoretically, we're still doing the thing that you said, right? We just looked and jotted it down, right? So the next thing we're doing is we're just doing like a quick trend check, okay? With the trends that we're gonna check now are going to be the trends that are in the question. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
So you're gonna try and show, look at this question here, look at that phrase,
The answer
and
to
we're gonna look at the data, and then we're just gonna see if it's true, right? But we're just gonna imagine that we've never even looked at the question. We were just looking at the data, and we were trying to figure out, based on what the data is, how we can kind of interpret what it tells us, right? If that doesn't make as much sense, don't worry about that. I'll explain that at the end, right? So you just try to answer this question for me using these bars. So you tell me which bar to circle and what it means.
right. So for the first one, acetate suppresses insulin-mediated glucose uptake in wild type. Okay, so you're gonna see where is acetate being present, I guess.
Ooh, okay, great. So let's break down the question for everyone on the line. So you said it correctly, actually. So you said acetate suppresses insulin-mediated glucose uptake, right? So what does that mean to you? Say it again.
That acetate has to be present. So
Acetate is present. Why is acetate got to be present?
because it's calcing.
Because it's suppressing it, right? Like you can say sometimes some of these rhetorical questions I ask y'all is they're rhetorical because it's like very, very like straightforward, right? It's got to be there if it's got to suppress it, right?
Right.
So acetate's present. So continue. What else is present?
And then wild type.
Wild type.
Or without the receptor. Wait, with the receptor, sorry.
Right. So let's just say the other last one is just receptor is the condition that we're looking at just to make it easier for ourselves, right? And then remember, we have to ask ourselves what's going on with insulin, right? Is insulin present or absent?
Present.
Present. Right. So now we figured out from the question what block we kind of need to look at ish, right? And because they're asking us like whether or not this is figured out by the graph, right? And acetate is the key feature of what they're looking at, right? We also have to remember, like, we got to check and see what are the difference between both plus and minus acetate. So I'll take over here, right? So as I'm reading this, I'd say, okay, cool. I know acetate needs to be present. So let me look at this condition. Well, let me clear everything, right? So I'd say, look, acetate suppression and insulin-mediated glucose, right? So, okay, in wild type adipocytes. So I'm gonna just go look at the two wild types. And I'm gonna look at the condition that has acetate present and has insulin present. See where I'm at, okay? Cool. And I'm gonna say, let me compare it to the same condition when I do not have acetate present, but insulin is around. Here. What do we see?
Decrease significant.
See a significant decrease, right? So let me repeat that again, right? So I just started off by saying, look, let me look at the wild type condition. And you told me that insulin had to be there because it was mediating the uptake. So what that told me is I couldn't look at any of these. Why could I not look at any of these?
Because they're not what they're asking for.
They're not what I'm asking. What's missing there?
Insulin.
Insulin is missing there, right? Cool, so we've got that part. And then the other part they told us was what? We've got to figure out whether or not like acetate being there or not is important, right?
Yes.
So we say, cool, let's look at the wild type. Let's see when it has acetate and insulin. Okay. But what happens if we take away acetate? Interesting. So can you kind of give us a one sentence way of understanding this difference here?
Okay.
What is acetate doing to the outcome of interest?
Acetate is allowing for glucose to go into.
Is it allowing or is it suppressing?
Sorry, suppressing.
How do we know which one is which, right? Which one is which? The right column, is that when it suppresses, or is this one when it suppresses?
The right one is suppressing.
How'd you know that?
Because, okay, so if you compare it to the other one.
Because it had acetate.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Right. Because remember, we're looking at two conditions that differ by one variable only, acetate, right? That basic lesson never went away, right? So when they told us all this, all I had to do is figure out, okay, cool, acetate suppressing, it's got to be there. Insulin mediated, it's got to be there, right? They're asking me to see if I can conclude something about that in wild type. So let me go to wild type. Let me see when insulin is around, cool, what happens? All right, when I add acetate, I suppress it in wild type. Cool, all right, let me look at the other condition that's no receptor here, right? All right, when I have insulin and everything, we're good, right? When I take away acetate, nothing changes. Interesting. So that tells me whether or not acetate is present, right? The only difference between these two is what? Acetate. So whether or not acetate is there or not doesn't change whether or not glucose is being taken up any faster, right? So if we think about what the difference there is, the independent variable that's being tested there is acetate. The outcome they were interested in was still glucose uptake, but the comma here is that it's in the presence of insulin in GCPR 43 minus. So now when you look at the question and you see the second part, when they say not in these other things, right? The way you interpret that is how we just said, like, so you're looking for the condition that has acetate, has insulin, right? In a mouse, didn't have the receptor. Remember, the second part came after the comma, if you really want to think about it from a grammar perspective. So the really thing that you're really, the independent variable that you're really focused on is the acetate condition. And the outcome is the glucose. So we can then confidently say that the answer to this question would be, this was actually very fortunate, that if acetate is around, right, we can make a significant conclusion that if acetate is around in a wild type mouse, right, insulin mediated glucose uptake will be suppressed. Did that make sense?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So thank you very much. I know there's a bunch more questions and I promised I'd go through all of them, but due to time, I'm gonna actually have to call it a night. So I'm gonna be on for the next 15 minutes until the 8 o'clock mark. I'm not gonna really do any tutoring. I'm just gonna answer questions that people have and questions that they're willing to ask over the call. I'm gonna have to, kind of might be away from my computer, so it might take me a while to respond to all of your chats. So I've got my contact information here. Thank you very much for spending 2 hours and 45 minutes and counting with me. Again, I have recorded tonight's session. I simply ask you get in contact with me somehow, some way to give me your email address. I will probably end up posting the edited version of tonight's lesson on YouTube and linking it to you guys. So please keep in mind, today is not a one-time occurrence. We, as in Elite MD Track, are a small group of med school students located at SUNY Downstate, Drexel Medical School, and in LA at USC. And we are looking to build very innovative data-driven approaches to MCAT tutoring and studying, as well as coaching and mentorship. So feel free to email us if you have more specific questions about your MCAT needs. Really curious about more information that we can give you. We have a data-driven MCAT passage tracker that we're building, and we are absolutely interested in people that are willing to try it out for free. So reach out. I'm available for the next 15 minutes. So whoever has that confidence and willingness and gumption to just jump out there and ask a question, just go ahead, shoot. Y'all got me for 15 minutes. How much do you charge for tutoring? So you can email me directly, but we charge $75 an hour for 8 hours with a decreasing rate of about $10 an hour if you get more hours. But we are kind of students and we're building a product. So we actually have a really strange pricing policy. Our pricing policy is pay what you can and pay for the value that you can. So we actually discuss pricing with people. Our rates are going to fall between $45 and $85 an hour, depending on your need. If your need is below that, we are giving away lots of pro bono tutoring, especially for any person that is disadvantaged. So if you're a student of color, LGBTQ, or if you're just economically disenfranchised, shoot us an email. And we can talk and see how, even if it's over a free group session, such as this one or a few other ones that we have for cars and a couple of different subjects, happy to help out. And we are always looking to pay it forward. And that's why we believe in collaborative learning, as well as giving our time and also paying forward either as a tutor or as a mentor. Let's see, what other questions do I have? How do I know when to stop reviewing my full length? I tend to do too much time. All right, so for full length, just be driven by purpose, right? Why are you looking at your full length exam? What are you looking to get out of it? How are you gonna know that you've gotten it, right? Be an independent learner and stop. And before you even do your next exam, come up with a plan for how you're gonna review it. Figure out what your objectives are gonna be. Are you gonna look to see the questions that you've got wrong this time that are topics that you knew going into this exam that you should have known? Or are you going to look at topics that are persistent? So one exercise that I have my students do is I have them use a tool that we made to just kind of do a simple redo and review. So for some of you guys that are a lot further along in your study process, it might be a lot easier to just go back and review an old exam that you did. And the goal of you reviewing the old exam might actually be to just see how you're doing, right? So a lot of you guys might say like, oh, okay, cool. Like I've done an exam. It's been a while. Like I obviously know everything that's on the exam. So if you're, for example, coming up with a quote unquote strategy for how you approach review, if you're a retaker especially, you probably have that old exam scorecard in your AMC. So a very simple exercise might be just retake the exam and see what happens, right? You think you're going to remember the exam questions, but you're really not. Like I've been tutoring for like 18 months, just MCAT, and I don't remember like all the 6 questions that are associated with that passage we did. I remember the logic behind how I got to the answers. And like, that's really what you want to get at, right? So if you remember the logic for the passage, great. That means you learned. You either learned the topic, the content, right? Or you took a passage focused approach to your studying and picked up the little intricacies of the critical thinking that you needed, right? So again, to answer the question of how do I know when I'm like ready, quote unquote, to get out of reviewing an exam, find an outcome that you want, right? Whatever that outcome is. So for this student here, the outcome is they wanted to compare their first attempt, right? The second time that they took the exam to their last attempt that they took untimed, right? And redid it in like a chunk of 15 questions. And look, they've learned that, hey, they got optics correct, but for whatever reason, they have an issue with it and they want to figure out what's going on, right? They've got questions that they got wrong. So yeah, so this is a student that got a question wrong twice, pick 2 different answers, right? So try to figure out an outcome that you're looking to measure for yourself as a way to know when to move, not just from like only full length exams, but like everything, right? So like a lot of the questions that y'all ask me, I'm literally going to say the same thing, right? Like, what's the outcome that you're looking to measure? How are you going to measure it? And how are you going to know when it's time to move on? It's when you meet that measurement, whatever outcome, whatever that measurement was for you. How do you avoid going beyond back and forth between questions? And all right, so here's a great question. How do you avoid going back and forth between the questions and the passages. It's mad easy, Stephanie. You knew what you wanted to get out of the passage when you started. 7 things, right? And if you got them, and you can keep them in your working memory. Remember, Jaleesa remembered those things 2 hours after we'd been talking, in a stressful situation, in front of a crowd, right? So that's the whole point of the whole exercise, right? Is you never have to really go back and forth, at least at the core, if you're doing a lot of critical thinking and planning out and asking yourself, okay, if it's an implicit question, I know my task. I got to take this thing from the outside to the inside, right? If you mapped your way through and you thought about ultimately those 7 things, it's easier for you to access these things and not get that MCAT foggy brain I mentioned. How different is my approach to CARS passages? So I actually don't personally tutor CARS passages. There's another tutor that does CARS passages, and he actually does free CARS sessions starting next Sunday. He is a first-year medical school student at the University of Southern California in LA, went to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, if any of you guys are familiar, and was an English lit major and got a perfect score on his CARS section. So we run these free sessions because we really do believe in pay it forward. So if you guys get in contact with us again, either email us or respond to me on social media, if that's where you kind of found out about today's session. We can go ahead and connect you on a weekly email that we send out with our, we do free CARS sessions. I do a free physics series every week of about 3 free sessions that are passage-based. And I obviously do this Sunday critical reasoning within science sections and how to prepare and study for MCAT efficiently. So reach out to us, you find out more. Okay, and I've got 9 more minutes, guys. So tips for efficient study blocking and taking breaks. Okay, so first of all, start off and think about how you work best. And I'm a kind of person who thinks of like days in terms of like how you block them out, right? So you can be a morning afternoon type of person, which means you're going to go for like 3 hours straight or 4 hours straight, right? Or are you on the other extreme like I am? I like to go 2 hours, like I need to go hard for 2 hours at a time, right? So even when I schedule my day out, I'll do 2 hour block of working out and personal stuff in my day, right? 2 hour block of I've got to tutor and run my tutoring business and like do all that. 2 hour block of cardio, Anki cards and review, right? And then evening I might do a 2 hour block of AMBOSS question bank passages, and then wake up in the morning and do a 2 hour block of reviewing, right? That works for me because I keep my 2 hours around a specific objective, right? So if you want the #1 tip for being an effective studier, especially in med school and even when you're doing MCAT, find the objective of what you're trying to get done with your time, right? And then define what ways you're going to divide your time that you have available for you. That's all you need to do. Objective, how you're going to divide it, prioritize is the last thing you got to do. How do you not get lost in the Biobiochem jargon? Easily. So Alfrean, you asked, how do you not get lost in Biobiochem jargon? And I said easily, not to be like condescending, but it's the same thing we've been talking about, right? You never cared about the jargon to start. GCPR 43 minus is that jargon you're talking about. And I never really remembered even to talk about that. Why? Because it simply represented a condition. It represented an independent variable to me, no receptor, right? Why was it so important that it represented an independent variable? Because the 7 things I needed to keep in my working memory were among them, what's the list of independent variables that are out there that I have to do? All right, so what else we have is Chem Phys, also 60% critical reasoning. Also is it, honestly, Chem Phys is a little bit of both. It's one of those where it's more 50-50 than Biochem, where honestly it's more like 66-33, right? So for Chem Phys, the challenge is, the reason why I recommend, again, taking a content-specific, passage-focused approach to your studying is you have to go through all that Chem Phys content, but take a passage-focused approach. Because, you know, I've had students who just took the Friday exam, for example, right? And, you know, I mentioned we do free tutoring sessions for physics that I give. And we've been meeting 3 times a week, free physics tutoring. And I'd worked with these students for 2 weeks. So they've been to like 6 sessions, and 3 of those sessions covered fluids of all things. taught them foods in a very traditional way. But one insight that I've learned about myself, because we're very insight driven, right? Like scientific approach to MCAT studying, insight's got to be big. One insight I've had in talking to them as they reflect on the last exam that they just took 2 days ago is, guess what was a problem on the exam? Fluids, right? Fluids was a question on the exam, but some of them felt not as prepared because we didn't spend as much time doing the critical thinking, tutoring, learning through passages, right? So that's the thing. That's the mistake you can't make in Chem Phys. You got to remember, it's very, very passage heavy, or not passage heavy, content heavy, right? Mad thick physics and all that, right? But you have to do it in a passage focused approach. So you can start to flex, kind of like that golfer I mentioned, start to fix your swing, start to build those skills for the critical reasoning skills that you need in Chem Phys. The passage type is a little different, and I actually also do a Wednesday free session on just how do you critically reason through a Chem Phys section, which again, I can also invite you if you guys hit us up. They're free. We just literally blast out. We just started. We're med school students. Med school starts on Monday, so we're not nearly as free as we used to be during the summer. So if you guys can get in contact with us, we'll send you out an email that has our schedule of just free stuff that we give out just to kind of pay it forward and help the tutors kind of learn from how they work with other people. So do I recommend Anki cards for Fulling? I love Anki. Anki is a vital tool for med school. I only recommend don't just simply Anki cards and don't simply Anki answers, right? Anki the logic behind the answer in the question that you write the Anki card yourself, right? So that's a little bit of a twisted way of saying things. What I mean by that is if you look at a question, the question you got wrong, figure out what was the critical thinking or what was the logical gap or what was the missing step in the process that's captured in the question that you missed, and write yourself an Anki card that is the flip inverse of that insight in order for you to come back to it and see if you've really, really gotten it. Hope that answers that question. How do we get access to, and where are they? So somebody asked a question about how do you get access to some of the extra, like literally we have a listserv that we're building. So if you guys email us, I'll move my slides to one that has my email address. If you guys literally just don't forget, email me right now. So that as I send out this recording, the edited version of it, or as we send out our weekly schedule for free stuff, or if you're interested in learning about what we do for private tutoring and want more of a private conversation, we can have that as well. Do you still believe you will have time after this session? Oh, shit. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. So I'm going to go ahead and end today's session. It's been a pleasure. I really, really love having a chance to meet new people. Lots of you guys participated and made this a very fulfilling experience for me. So at the 8 o'clock mark, the session will automatically close. But for all of you guys that have questions, again, email us. Are you done?